Chapter 343. 3 days later, west of the Black Fire Tribe's camp. It wasn't an endless, flat, and desolate wilderness. There were a few small hills on this piece of land, and withered weeds could be seen everywhere. There were even a few trees that weren't very tall. Hui Yen and Lu Chen had arrived, and with them came a large number of Black Fire Tribe's elite warriors. In front of these formidable and valiant barbarians, the atmosphere in the wilderness seemed to have become somewhat somber. Iron Bear and Black Bull, the two most trusted warrior leaders under Hui Yen, each led a group of men to sweep through the surrounding area. They plowed through all the places that could possibly hide outsiders' spies, ensuring the safety of this area. And in the center of the agreed land, the warriors of the Black Fire Tribe had all stayed a distance away. Only Lu Chen and Hui Yen stood there, gazing into the distance. "Do you think the people from the Ghost Fox tribe will come?" Hui Yen suddenly asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen replied, "They should come. We've already spread the word. Without strong support, I don't think the Ghost Fox tribe will be able to withstand this kind of pressure. And since they secretly sent people to join us that day, they're already afraid of battle. All they're asking for is face and conditions that will make their situation better." Hui Yen nodded. It seemed that he had no objections to Lu Chen's words. The sunlight of the wilderness shone down from the sky, shining on the two of them. One was tall, the other short, and their temperaments were different. Hui Yan's body was tall and sturdy, and he looked like the most valiant of the barbarians. On the other hand, the black-robed Lu Chen seemed to be hidden in the darkness. Even though it was daytime, he still gave off a gloomy feeling. Hui Yen glanced at him, and after a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "There's something I might need your help with." Lu Chen turned his head to look at him and said, Hui Yen said, "If possible, please see if there are any talents in our Black Fire Tribe, and then choose them as disciples. After grooming them for a while, they might be able to produce 1 or 2 priests in the future." Lu Chen frowned slightly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He stared at Hui Yen, but his tone didn't seem to change, except that there seemed to be a hint of coldness in his voice. "You want me to help your Black Fire Tribe train priests?" Hui Yen said, "Yes." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then said, "Your Black Fire Tribe has never had a priest for so many years, and now you have a promising talent?" Hui Yen shook his head and sighed. "Our Black Fire Tribe hasn't had a priest for at least a few hundred years. In the past few years, of course we have carefully searched the tribe, but we couldn't find anyone with the potential to become a priest." At this point, he paused for a moment, and his face looked somewhat calm. He continued, "But according to what I know, in the past, when choosing a priest disciple, it was always the previous generations of priests who chose from within the tribe. Legend has it that only priests can truly sense the witchcraft spiritual power emitted from a tribe member with potential. As for us mortals, no matter how hard we try, it is very difficult to sense. So, I can only ask for your help in this matter." Hui Yen looked at Lu Chen, a trace of sincerity on his face. Lu Chen's expression didn't seem to change, but after a moment, he faintly smiled, and a trace of ridicule flashed in the depths of his eyes. He said, "You can trust me on such an important matter?" Hui Yen didn't say anything. Beside the two of them, the atmosphere seemed to have suddenly turned cold. Just as the atmosphere became slightly tense, a figure suddenly appeared in the distance. After a moment, someone came over to report that the people from the Ghost Fox tribe had arrived. This news temporarily broke the cold atmosphere between Lu Chen and Hui Yen. Hui Yen nodded and ordered people to bring those people over. The group of people that came were the elite warriors of the Ghost Fox tribe. The one leading them was their tribe leader, but there were only 2 people following behind him. Bringing so few guards into the territory of the Black Fire Tribe, it was obvious that the Ghost Fox tribe leader understood that even if he brought a lot of people, it wouldn't be of much use. But when the Ghost Fox tribe leader saw the people of the Black Fire Tribe, his pupils couldn't help but shrink, and the muscles on his face slightly twisted. This was because there were at least 70 to 80 barbarian warriors of the Black Fire Tribe following Hui Yen and Lu Chen. From the looks of it, they were all people who had black fire runes inscribed on them. In other words, as long as the Black Fire Tribe wanted to, all the warriors present could immediately enter a demonic state. Just the strength of the Black Fire tribe gathered here was more than enough to destroy the Ghost Fox tribe. They could even start a war with the remaining Thunder Lizard tribe and Ghost Fox tribe. It was hard to say who would win. The Ghost Fox tribe leader fiercely cursed in his heart, hating the unfairness of the gods. How did the Black Fire tribe suddenly become so powerful? But the situation was beyond his control. No matter what, he didn't dare to openly say these words. Instead, he laughed along the way, and walked in front of Hui Yen and Lu Chen with quick steps. "Long time no see, brother Hui Yen." The Ghost Fox tribe leader opened his arms, as if he wanted a firm hug. Hui Yen stretched out a hand to block the Ghost Fox tribe leader's outstretched arm. His expression was indifferent and somewhat distant. It was obvious that he didn't like the words brother at all. However, the Ghost Fox tribe leader didn't show any awkwardness. He laughed, turned around, and nodded to Lu Chen with a smile. "Lord Priest, since we last met, you've really made people look at you in a new light." The other tribes had also seen Lu Chen's origins on the day of the 5 tribes battle. At that time, there were many who wanted to kill him. But no one would have thought that in such a short period of time, this human could actually increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe by so much. If he had known earlier, he would have killed this scourge that day no matter what. The Ghost Fox tribe leader thought bitterly in his heart, but he still smiled at Lu Chen wholeheartedly. Lu Chen had a whole new level of respect for the Ghost Fox tribe leader. After he came to the southern wilderness, he had seen many barbarians. Most of them were straightforward, violent, brave, and lacking in calmness. Among them, Hui Yen, who was somewhat scheming, was an exception. However, even Hui Yen couldn't do what this Ghost Fox clan leader did. In comparison, this Ghost Fox clan leader seemed more like a two-faced and scheming human. This made Lu Chen, who had been immersed in this treacherous and dangerous atmosphere since he was young, feel a sense of familiarity and closeness from this Ghost Fox clan leader. "Tribe leader, how have you been?" Lu Chen said to the Ghost Fox tribe leader with a smile. This smile diluted the cold and dark aura on his body. The Ghost Fox tribe leader smiled and said, "We brothers are just meeting each other. Why make such a big scene and bring so many people? There's no need." Hui Yen still kept a straight face and didn't speak. But Lu Chen said to the Ghost Fox tribe leader, "Actually, we just wanted to show you our strength, to prove that we didn't lie." As he said this, he pointed to the Black Fire tribe's warriors who were eyeing them like tigers and wolves, and said calmly, "We said that we will destroy your Ghost Fox tribe, so we will definitely destroy it." The Ghost Fox tribe leader's face stiffened, and his face sank. He sneered and said, "Although you are powerful now, if you go too far, we will join forces with the Thunder Lizard tribe. Even if you can defeat us, your strength will be greatly damaged." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "No, we can easily kill you all." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was speechless for a moment, and his face was livid. Lu Chen walked to his side and said, "Since the tribe leader is here today, you naturally know what to do. As for the Black Fire tribe, we can't really force you too much. So, as long as you do us a favor, your future treatment. Yes, I mean, at least you and your family will definitely not have to worry." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was furious and shouted, "Who do you think I am?" Then he paused and said, "If you have something to say, say it quickly." Lu Chen smiled and lowered his voice to whisper in his ear. The anger on the Ghost Fox tribe leader's face quickly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a surprised expression. At the same time, his expression gradually became serious. In the end, Lu Chen took 2 steps back and said, "That's it." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was silent for a long time, and said in a low voice, "This is not easy." Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Hui Yen. Hui Yen took a step forward, and his burly body suddenly walked in front of the Ghost Fox tribe leader. Hui Yen stared into his eyes and said, "Die or fight? You decide." The Ghost Fox tribe leader let out a long sigh, and then slowly nodded. Chapter 344. In the end, the Ghost Fox tribe leader quietly left. The people of the Black Fire tribe began to return to the camp. Hui Yen and Lu Chen walked together, but for some reason, the two did not speak. The feeling of seamless cooperation in front of the Ghost Fox tribe leader and the others suddenly became unfamiliar. This atmosphere was quickly noticed by the surrounding people. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the other trusted generals of the Black Fire tribe secretly glanced at them from time to time, but from beginning to end, no one dared to come up and say anything. Only when they saw the shadow of the camp and could even see the outline of the stone houses did Hui Yen suddenly say, "Do you have any misgivings or thoughts in your heart?" Lu Chen lightly said, "No." Hui Yen snorted and said, "Since that's the case, it's not difficult to help us cultivate 1 or 2 talents. Can't you help me with this?" Lu Chen's expression was calm. It was as if he did not feel the trace of anger that was faintly suppressed in Hui Yan's words. Or perhaps he had simply turned a blind eye to it. He said, "Why, do you think that I owe you something?" When Lu Chen said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice, and even had a hint of a sneer. As soon as these words came out, the people closest to them, such as Iron Bear and Black Bull, also heard it. For a moment, their faces all changed. Hui Yan's face turned ashen. He suddenly stopped, and his huge eyes revealed a hint of fierceness. He stared at Lu Chen and said in a low voice, "What do you mean by this?" Lu Chen did not show any fear. He also stopped and met Hui Yan's gaze. He said, "Oh, you don't understand what I mean?" When the two of them suddenly stopped, the surrounding troops immediately fell into a small commotion. First, the guards at the side stopped, and then the warriors further away also reacted and stopped. However, Tai Xiong and Hein You's expressions turned grave when they heard these words. They immediately commanded their subordinates to surround the 2 leaders who were at loggerheads with swords drawn. Then, everyone retreated at least 100 meters away. No matter what, if a tribe leader and a priest were to quarrel in public, it would really be somewhat shocking. Hui Yen also felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to turn around and give orders, he saw that Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the others had already taken the initiative to withdraw their subordinates far away. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. With a hint of admiration in his eyes, he nodded at the 2. Then, his expression turned serious again. He turned his head and stared at Lu Chen for a long time, then slowly said, "So, you still bear a grudge in your heart?" Lu Chen's expression was indifferent. He waved his hand and said, "I don't hold a grudge, but you have to remember that from the beginning, I never wanted to be a priest. It was you who used the secret of returning to the north to force me to do it. I had no choice." At this point, he laughed coldly and said, "I will naturally strive to do what I promised you. But if you still want me to be completely loyal to you or the Black Fire tribe, and to do my utmost, that is also the ravings of a lunatic." Hui Yan's face first flashed with anger. His fangs bared, like a monster that was so angry that it wanted to eat a human. But then he slowly suppressed it. After a while, the anger on his face gradually disappeared and was replaced by a wave of bitterness and helplessness. He smiled bitterly and walked in front of Lu Chen, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Looking at the towering buildings of the Black Fire camp in the distance, he suddenly sighed and said, "I don't know if you believe me or not, but from the beginning to the end, I really have no ill intentions towards you. Everything that I have done is not for myself, but more for the sake of the tribe's prosperity." Lu Chen did not speak. Hui Yen looked at him and said, "Do you still remember that I told you a few days ago that I would build a shrine for you? That was from the bottom of my heart. There was no falsehood. As long as it can make our Black Fire tribe strong again and restore the glory of our ancestors, I, Hui Yen, am willing to do anything. I can give up anything. Lu Chen, you have the favor of the fire god, you have powerful witchcraft spiritual energy, and your knowledge of power is much greater than mine. As long as you're willing to live in the southern border and agree to stay in our Black Fire tribe, I can promise you anything. You can take whatever you want from our tribe. Even my position as the tribe leader will be yours to decide." Hui Yen stared at Lu Chen and took a deep breath. His face was solemn, and with some determination, he said, "These are all words from the bottom of my heart. There is no falsehood." Under Hui Yan's piercing gaze, Lu Chen was silent for a moment, but he shook his head and said, "I am not interested in your position as the tribe leader, I just want to go home." Saying this, he turned around and walked towards the Black Fire camp. Hui Yen stared at Lu Chen's back with a complicated expression, his brows tightly knitted. The surrounding barbarian warriors did not know what was going on between the two of them, and did not dare to rashly approach. But after a while, a white-haired old man suddenly walked out from the crowd. It was White Eagle, and he quickly walked to Hui Yen's side. "How is it?" White Eagle asked. Hui Yen shook his head slightly, and White Eagle's expression immediately changed. But Hui Yen immediately lowered his voice and said a few words to him, most likely repeating Lu Chen's answer. After hearing this, White Eagle's expression slightly relaxed, and he pondered for a moment before saying, "If this is really the case, then this person does not have any other thoughts about the power of our tribe. This is also a good thing." Hui Yen sighed and said, "It's a pity that I can't use him." White Eagle comforted him, "Lu Chen is after all a human, and not of our tribe. In fact, even if he really wants to join us, there will always be many twists and turns in the process. This is also good. As for the matter of training the next priest, there is no hurry. I don't think he has completely made up his mind. Wait for a period of time, then find an opportunity to talk to him." Hui Yen nodded slowly and said, "That is the only way." The main force of the Black Fire tribe returned to the camp in high spirits, majestic and imposing, revealing a vigorous and ferocious aura, as if they wanted to find someone to kill at any time. The fierceness hidden deep within the bodies of these barbarian race warriors had become more and more obvious these days. And among these tall and ferocious barbarians, the black-robed priest, Lu Chen, was obviously a rather unusual existence. When he walked through the crowd, he was clearly out of place with the passionate and energetic barbarian warriors around him. But most of the barbarians were still full of respect for him and kept a sufficient distance from this wizard. When Lu Chen returned to his own stone house, everything seemed to have quietened down again. The darkness here always seemed to be able to isolate the outside world. Atsu ran out of the house and kept rubbing against Lu Chen's side, looking a little dissatisfied but very affectionate. Lu Chen laughed and reached out to pat its head, saying, Alright, I got it. I will definitely bring you next time. This time, the main point is not to fight or kill, it is just to scare people." As he said that, he looked around, but found that Yezi was not in the stone house at the moment, and he did not know where she went. But Lu Chen did not care too much. In fact, most of the time he did not pay much attention to this barbarian girl, but occasionally when she suddenly disappeared, it was probably because he was used to her figure in the house, and he actually felt a little uncomfortable. Lu Chen shook his head, walked into the depths of the stone house with Atsu, and sat down. He quietly looked at the darkness in front of him. His face was calm, or perhaps a little lonely. Atsu seemed to feel something and came over, putting its head on his knee. Lu Chen did not look down at it, but reached out to stroke the fur on the head of Atsu. After a moment, his voice floated faintly from the darkness, saying, "I really want to go back, Atsu. But after I said that, I suddenly realized that even if I go back, I will not have a home." Home. His voice gradually became lower. 9 days later, the situation in the northern part of the southern wilderness rose again. Among the 3 remaining tribes, the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe announced an alliance of blood, and reported to the gods of heaven and earth that the Black Fire tribe had committed countless evil deeds. The 2 tribes swore to be brothers of life and death, and would receive the blessings of the gods to slaughter this evil tribe in one fell swoop. In this way, the final battle of this land began. Chapter 345. Yezi. What deity did your sacred wood tribe originally believe in? Lu Chen asked Yezi. Early in the morning, when the sun had just risen, Yezi heard his question as she was getting up. Even though he was still fearful of the black-robed priest, Lu Chen did not offend or badmouth Yizichen in their daily interactions. In fact, he was much friendlier than most of the barbarians outside. That was why Yizichen was much more at ease in the dim priest's stone house and in front of the black-robed priest. At the very least, he was not as reserved and resistant to Lu Chen as he was in the beginning. After suddenly hearing this, Yezi was stunned at first, and then a trace of sadness flashed across her face. She said, "Why do you ask?" Lu Chen glanced at her and said, "What's wrong? Is it inconvenient to say?" Yezi hesitated for a moment and whispered, "An elder I know told me that in our current situation, we can no longer mention the ancestors of the gods." Lu Chen paused for a moment, probably only now realizing that in fact, he had exterminated the tribe and destroyed the belief of the ancestors and gods. For a moment, he was a little embarrassed, but fortunately he was sitting in the shadow, so he was not afraid of Yezi seeing him. However, after a moment, Lu Chen still said lightly, "It's okay, just tell me." Yezi probably still did not dare to disobey this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, so after hesitating for a while, he opened his mouth and said in detail, "When I was young, I heard from the elders in the tribe that we, the Divine Wood tribe, are the descendants of the tree god. Like the branches and leaves of a tree, we live in this wilderness for generations." "The tree god?" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted her and repeated. Yezi nodded and said, "Yes, the tree god." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then asked, "What does the tree god look like?" Yi thought for a moment, his face full of worship and yearning. His thoughts seemed to have returned to the heyday of the Divine Wood tribe. Well, according to the legend of the tribe, when the world was first born, there was a divine tree that stood between heaven and earth. It was the ancestor of all things, the source of all living beings in the world. The branches, leaves, and crown of the tree of God covered the entire vast land of the divine land. Every leaf was alive, and every seed it bore turned into a different barbarian. They were the earliest ancestors of all the tribes, and they have been living and multiplying until today. Lu Chen listened quietly and did not speak for a while. He glanced over and felt a little uneasy. He also felt a little regretful. He did not know if his words had angered the priest. After all, the Divine Wood tribe no longer existed. But after the timidity, Yezi was a little angry. She thought to herself, "Aren't you the one who started this? Sir, are you all right?" Yi was still a little afraid of the black-robed priest and asked in a low voice. Lu Chen looked up and shook his head. "It's nothing. It's just that those words just now suddenly sounded a little familiar." "Familiar?" Yi was stunned for a moment, and then asked in astonishment, "Where did you hear the legend of our tribe before?" Lu Chen smiled and did not answer her question. Instead, he stood up and asked casually, "In addition to your original Divine Wood tribe, are there any other tribes in the wilderness that believe in the tree god?" Yi thought for a moment and then shook her head. "I don't think so." Lu Chen nodded and said, "The Black Fire tribe believes in the god of fire, the Mountain Spirit tribe believes in the god of earth, and the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe believe that they are the descendants of the divine beast. Each tribe believes in a different god, but most of the tribes say that the god they believe in created all things and all living beings in the world." He slowly walked up to Yi, looked down at her, and asked calmly, "Why do you think this is so?" Yi had probably never been asked this question before. For a moment, she was a little tongue-tied. After a while, she said, "I don't know." Lu Chen said, "Then which one do you believe in?" Yi said without hesitation, "Of course I believe in the tree god of my tribe." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered the current situation. The Divine Wood tribe had been destroyed, and the god that she once believed in had long been abandoned. For a moment, Yi was at a loss. Lu Chen stared at her and slowly squatted down in front of her. Yi was a little scared by the black-robed priest's gaze. She subconsciously shrank back and murmured, What are you doing?" "It seems that you still remember the original tribe in your heart." He confirmed as if nothing had happened. Ye's heart suddenly sank, and her whole face turned pale. She lowered her head, trying to suppress the fear in her heart and beg for mercy from this terrible black-robed priest. At the same time, she even thought of the day when the Divine Wood tribe was destroyed and the painful scene of the people who died tragically in the black fire appeared in her mind. She suddenly realized that this person was still the most terrible demon. It turned out that these days, his kindness only made her let down her guard a little. Deep in her heart, she was still so afraid. The barbarian girl's body trembled as she stared at Lu Chen's palm. She felt that the terrible black fire would rise from it in the next moment and then engulf her. Perhaps before that, the almost boundless fear was about to engulf her. Lu Chen left the priest's stone house. Of course, he did not do anything to Yi before this. The barbarian girl looked obviously frightened, and Lu Chen could roughly understand the reason. Lu Chen felt a little helpless about the terrible image he left on the barbarians. However, this kind of thing could not be changed, and he had no intention of changing anything. However, before he left, he made it very clear to Yi that he did not care about this kind of thing. After listening to this, the barbarian girl seemed to be somewhat in disbelief, but she finally recovered from the state of being scared to death. Otherwise, Lu Chen really suspected that she would have been scared to death. But speaking of this, Lu Chen suddenly felt a little strange in his heart. He thought, aren't the barbarians known for their bravery and fierceness? Even if she is not a man, the barbarian girl should not be so fragile, nor should she have such a sensitive temperament. Or is it because I have too little contact with barbarian girls, and don't understand them at all? Thinking about it, ever since he came to the southern wilderness, it seemed that only one barbarian girl, He, had close contact with him. Lu Chen shook his head, and threw these thoughts out of his head. At the same time, he sneered in his heart. Hui Yan's so-called great cause of 1,000 years seemed more and more unrealistic. There were countless tribes in the southern wilderness. If each tribe had their own beliefs, then it would be impossible to truly unify all the tribes. Force could exterminate a tribe and force them to give up their ancestors and beliefs on the surface, but who could control the activities in the depths of their hearts? Moreover, even if they were strong for a moment and subdued everyone, but after a long time, there would definitely be changes. But at that time, he would not be able to control it. In the center of the Black Fire Tribe's camp, a large group of people stayed there, waiting calmly. When the cold wind blew, the entire tribe was solemn and silent, emitting a strong murderous aura. Today was the day of the expedition. The war for the final ruling power of the northern wilderness was about to begin. According to the tribe chief Hui Yan's request, in order to restore the glory of the tribe's ancestors and seek their blessings, the Black Fire Tribe held a sacrificial ceremony that had been interrupted for hundreds of years. And the person presiding over this sacred ceremony was, of course, the tribal priest Lu Chen, who had suddenly appeared. Looking at the black-robed priest approaching from afar, the people of the Black Fire Tribe had a complicated look in their eyes. Perhaps this was an absurd scene that had never been seen for thousands of years. A human was about to preside over the most sacred and important sacrificial ceremony of the barbarian tribe. There was nothing more strange in the world than this. Perhaps this was the reason why the gods in heaven were so high and unfathomable. A stone platform was set up in the center of the camp. Lu Chen walked up the steps. Under the gaze of everyone, he worshipped the heavens and the earth and prayed to the gods. Then, he suddenly raised his hands, and as his black robe fluttered, a dark flame suddenly rose. Immediately, all the Black Fire Tribe people put aside their complicated thoughts. No doubt could resist the power of the dark flame. Under the illumination of the black flame, all the barbarians knelt down. Lu Chen waved the black flame expressionlessly and looked up at the sky. He did not have much reverence for the so-called gods. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. His eyes focused and he looked at the black flame. He saw that the black flame suddenly shook violently. After a moment, it suddenly moved in a direction, like a hand beckoning the soul or guiding the direction. After a while, the black flame seemed to slowly return to normal. A complicated and slightly shocked look flashed across Lu Chen's face. When he looked up, he saw a secluded and dark stone house in the distance, quietly standing in the corner of the tribe. Chapter 346. Yi was suddenly informed that the black-robed priest was looking for her just before the army of the Black Fire Tribe was about to set off. When she jogged to Lu Chen's side, she heard Lu Chen telling her expressionlessly that she should prepare to leave with him. This request, or rather, an order, attracted the attention of many barbarian warriors, and many gazes fell on Ye's shocked face. In the barbarian tribes, at least in the northern border region, fighting had always been the business of men. Warriors wielded weapons and fought on the battlefield for the sake of the tribe and glory. They would never allow women to follow them to the battlefield. Although this order was obviously against the unwritten rules of the barbarian tribes, no one stood up and said anything. It seemed that between the reverence of the black-robed priest and the abnormality of a little maid, most people valued the former more. Therefore, Yi was muddle-headed and involuntarily followed the army and left the Black Fire tribe. Although in the beginning, Lu Chen was very calm and seemed to have told Yi to prepare before leaving, in fact, it was a completely different matter. The entire army of the Black Fire tribe was ready to set off. Even the most important ritual had been held. Of course, with so many people, they wouldn't wait for an inconspicuous little maidservant. After the black-robed shaman finished speaking to her, he immediately left. Therefore, the little barbarian maid, who was at a loss and in a panic, had no time to pack up. In the end, she just grabbed a few pieces of clothing and ran over. Then, she followed beside Lu Chen with an aggrieved and nervous expression as they walked towards the unknown battlefield. There were very few barbarian women who had gone to the battlefield. Therefore, Yi felt very unfamiliar and a little afraid of being in the army. After all, she was surrounded by burly men who looked murderous. Moreover, most of these people were not her tribesmen who had grown up with her. Instead, they were the murderers who had slaughtered her tribe not long ago. Yi felt very nervous, even breathing was a little difficult. She felt very ashamed and wronged because of this feeling. Even if she was a woman, especially as a daughter of the barbarian tribe, fear was still looked down upon by others, including herself. However, with so many complex emotions intertwined, in the end, the feeling of fear and uneasiness prevailed. So even though Yezi still had some resentment towards Lu Chen, she still subconsciously approached him. Lu Chen did not have any extra reaction to this. At most, he only glanced at her indifferently, and then allowed the barbarian girl to follow beside him. After walking for a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked Leaf, "Did you stay in the stone house alone in the Blackfire camp?" Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, what's wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then said, "I'm fine." Since he said that he was fine, Yi dared not ask any more questions. After that, Lu Chen did not say anything to her. After walking and stopping along the way, Yi followed the elite warriors of the Blackfire tribe to a campsite. Not long after, the sky turned dark. Before the sky turned dark, the leaders of the Blackfire tribe, led by Hui Yen, had already ordered the warriors to settle down. Therefore, after darkness fell, the campsite quickly quieted down. Everything seemed very orderly and austere. This atmosphere surprised Leaf a little. When she lived in her own tribe, which was the Divine Wood tribe, in the past, although she did not follow them out like this, she more or less learned about the situation of the warriors from the people around her. The barbarians were originally fierce and bold. As warriors who were about to fight to the death and did not even know if there would be a tomorrow or if they would return from the battlefield, they were even more unrestrained. Loud noises, shouting and drinking were common. Even fighting was not uncommon. In fact, this was the norm in many small tribes. But this night, for the first time, she saw the discipline of the Blackfire tribe suddenly become so strict. For a moment, she was a little frightened. Although he didn't know much about these battles, he could clearly feel that the murderous intent of these cold and quiet people seemed to be far sharper than that of the clansmen's warriors that he had heard and seen before. She still stayed by Lu Chen's side because on this land and in this troop, apart from this black-robed priest, she did not know who else she could rely on. With her was the huge black wolf Atsu. This time, Lu Chen also brought it out. But on this night, Atsu still looked a little lazy. It lay down by Lu Chen's side early and closed its eyes to sleep. In truth, Yi really wanted to ask Lu Chen what was the point of asking him to come along for this kind of battle. However, she was still too afraid of the black-robed priest. In the end, she hid this question in her heart and walked around him with her head lowered, trying to see if there was anything she could do. There were no barbarian warriors in the vicinity. Most people subconsciously stayed away from the black-robed priest, even if they had the enchantment runes carved by the black-robed priest himself. It was in this silence that Lu Chen suddenly said to Leaf, "Sit down. We're here to fight, not to enjoy life. There's no need to be so busy." Leaf was speechless after hearing this. After a long while, she returned to Lu Chen's side and knelt down. She then plucked up her courage and asked, "Sir, if that's the case, why did you bring me here?" If I don't clean up, I won't be of much use here. It should be of some use. Lu Chen looked at her calmly and said, I heard that when you barbarians are extremely hungry, you can eat people. Leaf's face turned pale. Her body trembled and she quickly said, No, there's no such thing. Sir, where did you hear this rumor? I've seen it. Lu Chen's eyes flashed slightly. It was as if he remembered what he had seen and heard in the dangerous land of chaos a long time ago. You've seen it? Leaf was stunned for a moment. Her face was full of doubt. It seemed that she really didn't believe it. Lu Chen smiled and didn't want to argue with her. He just lightly said, Rest early. Otherwise, we might have to wake up early tomorrow. Oh, Leaf agreed. She lay down not too far away from Lu Chen. At the same time, she secretly criticized in her heart, if the army hasn't reached their destination, of course they have to wake up early. You don't have to tell me that. But on this night, or perhaps the next day, just as Lu Chen had said, they woke up early, much earlier than usual. When darkness shrouded the earth, a large number of black shadows suddenly rushed out of the night. Then, like wild beasts, they fiercely pounced on the Blackfire's camp. The darkness seemed to solidify at that moment. In the camp, Lu Chen opened his eyes. His eyes were clear and full of spirit. It seemed that he hadn't slept at all. Beside him, Leaf suddenly woke up and jumped up. She said in surprise, What's wrong? What's wrong? But when she turned back to look at Lu Chen with a dependent and questioning gaze, she suddenly trembled and stood rooted to the ground. The black-robed priest was still sitting on the ground, but one of his hands was placed a foot in front of his chest. His palm was facing up. A black flame appeared in his palm and burned silently. Leaf held her breath and looked at the flame. Her body began to tremble. At the same time, the flame suddenly floated outward with a whoosh, like a person's finger, pointing in a certain direction. Lu Chen raised his cold eyes and stared at the nervous Leaf. After a moment, he suddenly asked, Is there anything strange in your lower abdomen? Chapter 347. The night was dark, and the darkness seemed to be boundless, casting the land under the night sky into darkness. The Blackfire campsite was also pitch black, and there was almost no light. The cold wind blew through the air, and Yi felt a little cold. For some reason, when the night wind blew past her, apart from the cold feeling on her skin, there was even a hint of pain as if she was being pricked by needles. She felt very nervous, and she felt a little breathless. She also felt that the dark sky looked like it would collapse at any moment, crushing everyone here to death. What made her even more terrified was the black flame in Lu Chen's hand. The burning flame was reflected in her eyes, and her body began to tremble. She covered her lower abdomen with both hands, and then a painful expression appeared on her face. After a suppressed moan, Yi suddenly knelt on the ground, and then began to twitch like a dying beast. Soon, a black flame slowly lit up in the depths of her pupils. Lu Chen seemed unmoved as he watched the young barbarian girl's pained expression. From the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of helping her. He just watched her coldly. After a while, he withdrew his gaze and looked up at the sky. He stared at the dark and boundless sky. It was the high and mighty night. Then he smiled coldly, and his eyes were filled with mockery and contempt. The darkness rolled like a surging tide. The night wind suddenly became urgent, and the whistling sound suddenly became mournful. Then, there was a sudden flash of ice-cold blade light in the night. In the depths of the Blackfire tribe's camp, Leaf shivered. The inexplicable and indescribable pressure on her suddenly disappeared. She sat up and looked back into the distance. She saw countless figures moving in that direction. Roars and roars rose and fell one after another. Impressively, it was an incomparably fierce battle. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of her. It was Lu Chen walking over. At the same time, the fire god's staff had appeared in his hand and was gradually emitting a bright light. Lu Chen no longer looked at her, and instead stared into the darkness in the distance. After a moment, he raised the fire god's staff and stabbed it into the dark sky. At the same time, he chanted a mysterious and ancient curse, and a dark aura gushed out from his body. With a boom, large patches of black flames suddenly rose from his body and danced wildly in the night. The fire god's staff instantly shone brightly, radiating a brilliant light in the night. It was like a sun that suddenly appeared in the darkness, and no one could look directly at it. Then, countless dark auras shot up from the magic staff, and then flew into the dark battlefield, looking for the cursed black lines. A moment later, angry roars and roars could be heard, like the wild roars of wild beasts. In the darkness, cries of alarm and screams could be heard. Many black figures suddenly grew in size. Even though they were so far away, they could still faintly hear the terrifying sounds of bones cracking. Yezi had a rough idea of what was happening in the darkness over there. Her eyes were filled with fear. When she looked back and saw the black-robed priest controlling the fire god's staff, looking at his demon-like appearance, she only felt that her legs and feet were sore, and her heart seemed to be unable to resist all this horror. In the distance, the wild roars grew louder and louder. The bloody smell of slaughter was also drifting with the wind, and it became thicker and thicker. The night became more and more desolate and dark. This was the first time that Yi, as a woman, was so close to a cruel battlefield of life and death. From the darkness, she could clearly feel the horror of the chaotic battle. All kinds of sounds came to her, and countless images formed in her mind. The sounds of breaking, howling, screaming, breaking bones and bleeding, falling to the ground, and all kinds of sounds that contained pain and brutality, filled with the smell of slaughter, all came to her ears, one after another. Yi trembled all over. At that moment, she suddenly felt that she really did not look like a barbarian. But women never had to go to the battlefield. At this time, the black figure standing in front of her seemed to have given her a lot of courage, helping her to block out a lot of darkness. Because from the beginning to the end, Lu Chen had no intention of joining the battle, and even Yi took advantage of it. She secretly stayed in the same place and did not move. Then, in the darkness of the night, she heard the clamorous and terrifying voices grow louder and louder. After a long while, they suddenly reached a climax. It was someone howling in pain in the night, with furious roars and roars, as if they were questioning something or cursing at the top of their lungs. Then, darkness fell, and an incomparably thick stench of blood covered everything. Until all the sounds began to slowly fade. Until dawn. Yi did not sleep for the whole night, nor did she dare to sleep. She was extremely nervous, and at the same time, she had a deep fear. The pain of the extermination of her tribe was still haunting her for so long, and she could not forget it. When dawn came, everything finally settled. When the morning light shone from the horizon, a new day had begun in the human world, and a new chapter had opened in the wilderness. This land, with the dripping blood and horrible corpses, used the cruelest method of sacrificing life to announce the arrival of this day. When Hui Yan, who was bathed in blood, came to the side of Lu Chen, his face had a trace of exhaustion, but his eyes were very calm. He nodded to Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled. Just when he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a noise in front of him. Hui Yan also noticed it and turned his head to look. He saw a figure suddenly coming from the crowd. He looked like an ordinary barbarian, but the most obvious difference was that he was wearing a fox's fur on his head. That was the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe. In addition, the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe was holding a head in his right hand. It was dripping with blood, as if it had just been chopped off not long ago. Even though the head was already dead, there was still a look of anger on his blood-stained face. Hui Yan and Lu Chen's eyes fell on the head of the dead man at the same time. That face seemed familiar. They had seen it before, and it was also a chief of a large tribe. Hui Yan let out a long sigh, and Lu Chen smiled. The two looked at each other, and after a while, Hui Yan suddenly said, "Thank you." Lu Chen nodded and did not say anything. At this time, the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe had already walked in front of them, and then casually threw the head in front of them. He grinned and said, "The head of the Thunder Lizard tribe is yours." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Well done. You can rest assured about what we promised you." The chief of the Ghost Fox tribe smiled and then turned to leave. Looking at the direction in which he strode, Hui Yan's expression was complicated. After a while, he said in a low voice, "In the past, in the southern wilderness, no matter whether the tribe was strong or weak, when there was a fierce battle, we would fight openly to the end. Even if we died, it was only for the honor of our ancestors. We have never used this kind of method." Lu Chen turned around and took the opportunity to pat his shoulder. Then he smiled and said, "It's okay. You will soon get used to this feeling and like it." After saying this, he walked away. Hui Yen stared at the back of the black-robed priest and did not say a word. Chapter 348. In the barren northern part of the southern wilderness, the 5 tribes had maintained a delicate balance for at least 100 years. But in this year, everything suddenly changed. First, the mountain spirit tribe gained the favor of a new high priest from the south, and the tribe's strength rose sharply. Then, the 4 northern tribes besieged them. After a fierce battle, the mountain spirit tribe, who had the upper hand in the battle, was suddenly killed by an external force. As a result, the tables turned and the mountain spirit tribe was defeated by the 4 tribes. However, the situation did not calm down. Soon, the Black Fire tribe, one of the 4 tribes, suddenly gained a mysterious human high priest. This was something that had never happened in the countless tribes of the southern wilderness for thousands of years. However, all the rumors, slander, sneers, and swords were nothing in the face of weapons and blood. The black-robed priest had obviously gained the power of the god of fire worshipped by the Black Fire tribe. Using this powerful and strange witchcraft, the power of the entire Black Fire tribe suddenly increased by leaps and bounds. What happened next shocked the other tribes of the wilderness even more. After the Black Fire tribe experienced a fierce internal strife, the new chief, Hui Yen, became a bloodthirsty and crazy beast. He began to devour all the living things around him. They destroyed the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe. Then they started a war against the Ghost Fox tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe. When the dark flames covered the sky, when the demonic Black Flame warriors were rampaging and slaughtering lives, the Ghost Fox tribe, who were fighting fiercely on the battlefield, suddenly turned around and gave the Thunder Lizard tribe, who were soaked in blood, a heavy blow from behind. For many years, the Thunder Lizard tribe had always been one of the most populous and powerful tribes in the northern part of the wilderness. They were also the tribe that opposed the rise of the Black Fire tribe the most. But on this day, their fate fell into the abyss and they sank into oblivion forever. The army of the Thunder Lizard tribe quickly collapsed in panic, anger, and fear. What awaited them was an overwhelming, crushing defeat. Then, the Black Fire tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe merged into one and attacked the base camp of the Thunder Lizard tribe. Finally, this large tribe with a long history was destroyed and many treasures and people were captured. The smoke had yet to disperse. The once prosperous campsite of the Thunder Lizard tribe was now a complete mess. The fierce barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe were everywhere. They were laughing wildly, shouting and looting everything they could see. They looked like a group of wild beasts who had fallen into a state of madness. However, among this group of victors, there were some who were clear-headed, such as Hui Yen and Lu Chen. They ordered all the captured barbarians of the Thunder Lizard tribe to gather and guard them, so that they would not be harmed by the frenzied barbarian soldiers. However, even so, many members of the Thunder Lizard clan had died tragically in the campsite. The strong smell of blood drifted with the wind, and the battlefield that had just gone through a catastrophe looked like hell on earth. Yi, who had been walking all the way, was trembling nonstop. She followed closely beside the black-robed priest, not daring to stray even half a step away. Without a doubt, this scene reminded her of the massacre of the Sacred Wood tribe a few days ago. She felt that she would be tortured by this bloody scene for the rest of her life. That kind of fear made her feel a little hopeless and a little painful and ashamed. Lu Chen, who was walking in front of her, suddenly stopped. Atsu, who was walking beside him, also stopped. Only Yi, who kept stealing glances at the restless Yi, almost bumped into them. She was so shocked that she almost cried out for mercy. Just then, a group of beastmen ran past them, laughing maniacally. They smashed and looted without a care in the world. One or two of the barbarian warriors even saw Ye's figure, and their eyes suddenly lit up, and they rushed towards Ye's direction. Lu Chen looked at them indifferently. One of the barbarian soldiers suddenly cried out. His voice was filled with fear and respect. Then, someone rushed over and kicked the two idiots. Then, he dragged the two dizzy fellows and retreated while smiling at the black-robed priest in front of him. He nodded and bowed to the black-robed priest and retreated for a distance. Then he turned around and ran away. Yi looked at the backs of the barbarian soldiers with a pale face. Her chest heaved, and the corners of her eyes twitched. Although nothing really happened just now, the madness in the eyes of the barbarian soldiers, as well as the even more terrible scenes around her, told Yi what kind of fate would have awaited her if the black figure in front of her had not stopped her. She grasped the corner of her clothes, and then quietly moved closer to Lu Chen. "Are you afraid?" Lu Chen continued to walk forward without turning back to look at her. However, he seemed to casually ask this question. The corners of Ye's eyes twitched a few times. She looked at the bloody scenes around her and the messy camp, and answered in a low voice, "Yes." But at this moment, Lu Chen did not speak anymore, and his expression did not change much. He continued to walk forward indifferently. Yi followed behind him. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt angry. A wave of resentment and anger surged in her heart, and she could not help but say, "Your Excellency, these people died because of you, didn't they? And those who died in the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe. Countless souls wander in pain in the wilderness because of you. Don't you feel a little guilty?" Lu Chen paused for a moment. After a while, he turned around and looked at Yi. After Yi said those words, she was subconsciously shocked. When Lu Chen stopped and looked at her, she was even more shocked. The sense of awe suddenly surged, and she was so scared that she took a few steps back. She murmured, "Sorry, Your Excellency, how dare you speak to me like this?" Lu Chen looked at her calmly and said slowly. Ye's face was pale. She kept shaking her head and waving her hands. She tried to explain to the black-robed priest, but for a moment, she did not know what to say. In her heart, she was extremely regretful at this moment. She even scolded herself 1,000 times. Was she out of her mind just now? However, Lu Chen seemed to have no intention of punishing her. After staring at the barbarian girl for a moment, he suddenly looked a little sad and said, "Everyone is the same." Yi was at a loss. After a while, she heard Lu Chen suddenly ask her, "Don't you feel strange?" Ye's eyes widened in confusion. She did not know what the black-robed priest was talking about. Lu Chen turned to look at his surroundings and said word by word, "When you see those ferocious-looking barbarian soldiers, you tremble in fear. You don't even dare to breathe loudly. But when these barbarians see me, they are even more afraid. I'm sure you know what I'm capable of and what I'm capable of." He turned around and looked at Yi. A trace of ridicule flashed in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "But you dare to be so rude to me, and even question me in front of my face. This courage is much stronger than those barbarian soldiers, but you do not dare to speak in front of them. Tell me, why is that?" Yi was tongue-tied and did not know what to do. Lu Chen continued to say, "That is because, in your heart, even if you do not admit it, you have already determined that I am good to you. It seems that I will not do anything to you, right?" Ye's face was pale as she shook her head desperately. Her body trembled, and suddenly knelt down in front of the black-robed priest. Then she kept kowtowing and said, "I was wrong, my lord, I was wrong. Please don't kill me. The human heart is the same. We will be in awe of strangers, but always like to be rude to those who are close to us." Lu Chen's expression did not seem to change. He just looked at Yi condescendingly, and then his black robe swayed, turned around and walked away. Blood and fire flowed and burned around him, and the darkness followed him like a shadow. Yi knelt on the ground, and after a long time, she raised her head and looked at the back of the dark figure going away. For a moment, she was at a loss. Then, as if she had suddenly lost all her balance, she suddenly sat down on her own feet. Chapter 349. Hui Yen stood in the middle of the Thunder Lizard tribe's camp and looked around. He was full of satisfaction and couldn't help but feel the urge to roar to the sky. However, he managed to control himself. There was still a long way to go in the future. Restoring the glory of the Black Fire Tribe's ancestors was only a small step. Hui Yen felt a little heavy when he thought of this. Especially when he looked to the south, he thought that there might be more powerful tribes in that direction, and even more terrifying priests, shamans, and venerables blocking the way. When he thought of these things, he couldn't help but feel a little depressed. However, the goal in his heart was still unwavering. Just at this moment he saw a black figure walking over from afar. His eyes immediately lit up, and he revealed a smile as he went to greet the figure. "How was it?" Lu Chen asked him. "A great victory," Hui Yen replied. The two of them only said these two simple words. Then they looked at each other and smiled at each other. Along with their smiles, the barrier between them that had been faintly discernible before seemed to have faded a little. The two of them stood side by side, looking at the black smoke drifting around them and the messy battlefield. Hui Yen suddenly said, "Lu Chen, how far away is your witchcraft from becoming a true shaman?" Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and thought for a moment. He said, "It should still be a distance away, but these days my witchcraft spiritual power has been improving. His eyes flashed and he seemed to change his words. "Maybe it's because of the fire god's staff." Hui Yen obviously had great confidence in the fire god's staff that was passed down from his ancestors, so he didn't notice the subtle change in Lu Chen's expression. He just nodded and said, "That's good. After all, shamans and venerables are the strongest people in the world. It's rare to see one in the vast wilderness. It's not that easy." He turned to look at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "But since you have the fire god's favor, maybe you really have a chance to achieve this goal." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I hope so." Hui Yen looked to the front. From where he was, he could see the captives of the Thunder Lizard tribe being chased to a corner. There were many of them, and the sound of crying could be heard. They were surrounded by the Black Fire warriors, guarding and protecting them. Otherwise, the beastly soldiers in other places would be crazily plundering at this moment. Perhaps they would kill their way over, and at that time, blood would flow like a river. As for why they wanted to keep so many captives, it was needless to say. Hui Yen turned to look at Lu Chen and pointed in the direction he was pointing. "The population of the Thunder Lizard tribe is much more than I expected. The number of people we caught this time is at least twice as many as the previous 2 times combined." Lu Chen nodded and said, "This is a good thing." Hui Yen chuckled. However, at this time, Lu Chen suddenly opened his mouth and asked him a question that seemed to have no rhyme or reason. "We've captured so many people from other races. Have you thought about finding talents among them?" Hui Yen didn't react for a moment and said in surprise, "What talents?" After a pause, he reacted, "Oh, you mean those Black Fire guards? We can continue to do that." Lu Chen stared at him for a moment and reminded him bluntly, "You told me a few days ago that you are planning to groom other new priests?" Hui Yan's body shook and his expression instantly became serious. He took 2 steps towards Lu Chen and asked in a low voice, "What? Have you thought it through?" Lu Chen said lightly, "I have not decided what I want to do yet. But before that, I want to ask you something." Hui Yen said, "Speak." Lu Chen looked at his eyes and said slowly, "You asked me to search for people with the potential to become priests, but there are so many captives. If I find such talents among them, what do you plan to do?" Hui Yen was startled, as if he had never thought that Lu Chen would ask such a question. He seemed to subconsciously want to say something, but then he tightly pursed his lips. After a long silence, his expression slowly became unsightly. He said, "This matter is of great importance. Let me think about it carefully before I give you an answer." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Okay." As he spoke, he turned around and saw that Yi was following Black Wolf Atu behind him. His face was filled with uneasiness and worry as he stood silently in the corner. 3 days later, the Black Fire Tribe's army returned to their camp after a great victory, along with a large number of Thunder Lizard tribesmen who had been captured. In this northern region of the wasteland, there was finally no longer any power that could stop the Black Fire Tribe. On this day, the entire Black Fire Tribe was in an uproar. Everyone sang and danced, praising their ancestors and worshipping the gods. They praised the Fyrock tribe leader who had made great contributions, saying that he was a decisive genius that had not been seen in the past 500 years and would not be seen in the next 500 years. Hui Yen was also very happy. He drank and celebrated with the people until it was dark. Only then did he return to his residence with the help of others. However, when he walked into his stone house, he saw 3 figures standing inside. They were White Eagle, Iron Bear, and Black Bull, his 3 most trusted subordinates in the Black Fire tribe. Hui Yen was startled and carefully looked at them. He saw that the 3 of them didn't have a smile on their faces, and their expressions were a bit serious and dignified. Hui Yen immediately sobered up a little. He straightened his body, calmed himself down, and waved his hand to let the people supporting him leave first. Then he walked to the seat in front of him and sat down. First, he took a big gulp of water from the cup next to him, and then suddenly splashed it on his face. His body shook a little, and then he wiped his face with his hand, looking much more sober. He looked at the 3 people and said, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" The 3 people looked at each other, and then White Eagle took a step forward with a worried expression. He said, "Chief Iron Bear and Black Bull came to find me. They are worried about something." Hui Yen looked at his 2 powerful subordinates. Seeing their serious expressions, he asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Iron Bear clenched his teeth and said, "Chief, this time, we defeated the Thunder Lizard tribe and took a lot of wealth and people. The result is much better than the previous battles." Hui Yen nodded and said in a puzzled tone, "Yes, this is a good thing." Iron Bear suddenly raised his head and said urgently, "But we have captured too many people. In these 3 days, I saw Priest Lu Chen continuously force the Thunder Lizard captives to surrender and then inscribe the Black Flame seal on them to turn them into Black Fire guards." Hui Yen seemed to understand what he wanted to say, and his expression immediately became serious. He said, "How is it? How many people are there?" Iron Bear turned back to look at Black Bull. Black Bull hesitated for a moment and said, "Chief, I have been following the priest these days, helping him deal with these matters. I have secretly counted the number of Black Fire guards. Now, they have already surpassed the warriors of our Black Fire tribe." At the end of his words, a trace of deep fear and worry appeared on his rough face. At the same time, he subconsciously looked at the door outside, and then lowered his voice, saying, "Chief, we really can't go on like this. There are too many Black Fire guards, and they are all warriors who can transform into demons. The total number of warriors of our tribe is almost 20 less than the Black Fire guards. If we were to count the warriors with the ability to transform into demons, the difference would be even greater." He clenched his teeth and seemed to hesitate a few times. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Chief, the priest has ulterior motives. We really won't be able to stop him." There was no longer any smile on Hui Yan's face. He only looked deeply at the 3 of them. After a moment, he slowly said, "Are you suspecting the priest?" White Eagle and the other 2 looked at each other, and after a moment, the 3 of them lowered their heads at the same time. Finally, it was White Eagle who opened his mouth and said sincerely, "Chief, we have to guard against this." Hui Yen was silent for a long time. Just as White Eagle and the other 2 were feeling uncertain, they heard Hui Yen slowly ask, "Then, do you have any ideas?" As soon as this was said, the 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief, and then a smile appeared on their faces. Chapter 350. Lu Chen dreamed of the damn Baldy. He had not dreamed for a long time, because for many years his body had developed a habit of being as tense as a bowstring all the time. Even when he fell asleep in the dead of night, he slept very lightly. Once there was any danger or a foreign object approaching, he could almost instantly wake up and then let himself enter a life-threatening state from the most relaxed state in the blink of an eye. However, this was not a pleasant habit. It was just a painful instinct that Lu Chen had honed in order to survive when he was lurking inside the evil sect. Just that the days passed slowly, he also slowly got used to it. Until this night, he had a dream. In the dream he saw the Lord Tianlon, who he often called the Damn Baldy. From a very young age, he was adopted by this unusually tall and burly man. He gave the young Lu Chen the harshest training in the world, groomed him into an almost perfect shadow, and then put him into the world's most dangerous and most terrifying evil sect. In the midst of countless ferocious evil sect demons, let him little by little get closer to the ultimate goal. That matter was so unimaginable that no one believed it, and it was also so difficult that it was unimaginable. In those years, it was unknown how many innocent people died in the hands of the evil faction. The dripping blood seemed to be able to gather into a river now. During this period of time, the Black Wolf from all those years ago had always been watching coldly from the sidelines. He didn't lend a hand and just watched coldly from the sidelines. His nerves seemed to have been tempered into ice a long time ago, and they wouldn't change even after a myriad of years. He was cold to the extreme. Until the last moment, in that desolate valley, in the sky full of fire and the brilliant god-subduing spell formation, he completed his mission. That light was so dazzling and brilliant that the shadow disappeared in the blink of an eye. His life also seemed to be like this. After a sudden flash of light, it immediately returned to darkness, and then silently hid in the shadows. Such a life, if you look back, what will you remember? Blood, killing, sorrow, regret? Cruelty, anger, betrayal, suspicion? No, in this rare dream night, in that dream that he had not had for a long time, he did not see these things that had haunted him his whole life, things that he could not get rid of. What he saw was that bald man. What he remembered was that man pulling a young boy up from the dirty corner of the trash, staring at him, and then revealing a trace of a smile. He still remembered that day. That damn Baldy's eyes were so bright and clear that they surpassed all the brilliance in the world. He also remembered that damn Baldy's hand had reached out to help him wipe off the dirt and tidy up his clothes. It turned out that after so many years, he still remembered the warmth of that big hand. That hand held the youth's small hand, and just like that, they left, walking into the distance. The detestable and despairing dark corner behind him was getting further and further away. From then on, no matter how dangerous or despairing the years were, he did not have a shred of regret. That day, he clearly saw his own joyful smile in the damned Baldy's eyes. That joy he would remember for the rest of his life, even if there was another shadow in front of him. When he left that day, that damn Baldy also seemed to be smiling. Then he woke up. When he regained his full consciousness, in the shadows of the darkness, the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. There was a hint of hope and expectation that he had never shown before in front of others. He was just like the youth he used to be. Until a moment later, he opened his eyes and saw the darkness. He was silent in the darkness, and his smile slowly disappeared. He lowered his head slightly and thought to himself, "What's going on today?" Then he looked towards the north and thought, "Those people I know, what are they like now?" Priest Lu Chen's power is about to be established. It is not easy to topple him now. In the stone house that was still lit in the middle of the night, the Black Fire Tribe leader Hui Yen and his 3 most trusted subordinates had not dispersed yet and were still sitting around talking. The one who spoke at this time was Hui Yen. His face was solemn, and his gaze was fixed on the small fire in front of him. He said in a heavy tone, "Even if what you say makes sense, even if I believe the many threats you have said, but you are not his match, so what?" White Condor, who was sitting on his left, thought for a moment and leaned forward a little, saying, "Although the priest's witchcraft is powerful, but his physical body has always been slightly weaker. As long as we can trick him here, 1, he will leave those Black Fire Guards, 2, we might have a chance to kill him suddenly." Before he finished, Hui Yen shook his head, saying, "This won't do. Once we fail, the whole situation will be ruined. Also, Lu Chen is careful and cautious. Once he discovers this, the consequences will be unimaginable. This method can only be used at the last moment, when there is no other way." At this time, Tai Xiong suddenly spoke, "Tribe leader, there is something I have never dared to ask you, but since we have talked about it today." Hui Yen interrupted him, saying, "Speak." Iron Bear hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's about the black flame runes on our bodies. The great fire god bestowed great power upon us, but I heard that Priest Lu Chen also uses these runes to control the Black Fire Guards. It's said that he can control the life and death of the Black Fire Guards with a single thought." Hui Yan's face darkened. Tai Xiong clenched his teeth and continued, although the black flame runes that our Black Fire Tribe warriors get are different from those of the Black Fire Guards, and the most obvious difference is that the runes are engraved on our heads and on their chests. But, Chief, is there really no danger? The gazes of the three fell on Hui Yen for a moment. Hui Yen was silent for a moment, saying, I have actually asked Lu Chen about this in private, and Lu Chen's answer was that there is no problem with the runes on our Black Fire Tribe's side, and there is no danger like you said. Tai Xiong, Black Bull, and White Condor looked at each other. After a while, White Condor couldn't help but ask, can his words be trusted? This time, Hui Yen was silent for a long time, then suddenly sighed, saying, I don't know. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of the other three turned ugly. White Condor immediately said in a low voice, if that is the case, then we have to get rid of this person. Otherwise, if something happens in the future, our Black Fire Tribe will be destroyed. Hui Yen lifted his gaze and looked at the three, suddenly saying, do you think that I was wrong to invite Lu Chen back? The three of them were stunned for a moment. After a while, Tai Xiong smiled bitterly and said, how can I say that clearly? If it weren't for the priest, our Black Fire Tribe wouldn't have been able to unify this land in such a short time. The few looked at each other, speechless, and discussed here and there for a long time. They thought of many plots and schemes, but they were all rejected one by one. In the end, they were all at a loss. However, at this time, perhaps the situation made them more aware of the danger that Lu Chen was in, and the murderous intent on their faces became even more intense. Only Hui Yen seemed to be a little calmer. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly sighed, saying, actually, there is still one last way. What? Let him go. Hui Yen said, he has always wanted to leave this wasteland and return to the north. As long as I tell him that secret, maybe he really will leave without caring about anything else. The expressions of the other three instantly changed. Clearly, they were quite tempted, but very quickly, White Eagle frowned again. He looked at Hui Yen and said softly, if that's the case, what should we do with so many Black Fire Guardians? Also, our tribe can only have what we have today because of the power of witchcraft. If he leaves, the tribe will not have a priest, then what should we do? Tai Xiong and Heinyo also said. Hui Yen snorted and couldn't help but glance at them, saying, now you know to talk about the priest, then why did you want to kill him just now? The two barbarian warriors immediately smiled awkwardly, but Hui Yen didn't seem to have any intention to pursue the matter. Instead, he quickly fell into deep thought, and after a while, he suddenly stood up and walked out. The three were shocked, saying, Chief, where are you going? Without turning his head, Hui Yen said, I thought of a way, maybe I need to have a good chat with our priest Lu Chen. White Condor and the other two looked at each other and didn't say anything, but each had a serious expression. The night was about to pass, and the first rays of dawn appeared on the horizon. Chapter 351. When Yi woke up at dawn that morning, she didn't feel anything unusual at first. Although she didn't like the darkness in the stone house, she gradually got used to it after staying here for a long time. He was used to this stone house, used to the light here, used to the huge, eccentric and lazy big black wolf, and also used to the existence of that mysterious dark figure. In Ye's past life, she was just a normal berserker girl. She never thought that she would have such a life experience, but everything changed when the day of her race's extermination came suddenly. Therefore, she had always hated the black-robed priest, but unconsciously, she seemed to be slowly relying on him. For example, when she followed him to the battlefield a few days ago, she had already discovered that the black figure had become the only thing she could rely on. Therefore, although she would sometimes tell herself that the black-robed priest was her enemy and that she should hate him, she gradually forgot those feelings most of the time. It was the same when she woke up that day. Leaves stretched herself and yawned. Then she stood up and prepared to go out to fetch water and start a new day of work. But very quickly, she suddenly felt as if something was not quite right. It was in this house. She turned her head and looked around. Everything in her eyes was the same as usual. The dim light, the sleeping black wolf Atsu, and the figure sitting quietly. There was nothing unusual. Yezi was a little puzzled. She carefully looked around but still found nothing. Finally, she shook her head and got up to walk out of the stone house. After she left, Lucien, who was sitting in the shadow, slowly opened his eyes. He looked at the back of the barbarian girl and frowned slightly. He whispered, "She's really sensitive to witchcraft." He lowered his head and opened his clenched fist. In the center of his palm, there was an extremely small black flame that was almost invisible to the naked eye. Previously, he had been holding it tightly in his palm, not revealing any clues. He thought about it thoughtfully. After a while, he suddenly laughed. There was a little malicious ridicule in his eyes. He said softly, "Find a priest from another tribe after the human race? I'm afraid the people of the Black Fire tribe are going crazy." Yezi was busy working. Halfway through her work, she saw the chief of the Black Fire tribe, Hui Yen, come to the stone house of the black-robed priest. Hui Yen and Lu Chen had the highest status in the Black Fire tribe. Even Yezi, who was originally an outsider, was in awe of Hui Yen. She hurriedly saluted him. However, Hui Yen clearly didn't care about the people around him. After a casual wave of his hand, he walked into the house. At the same time, he ordered the people around him that he had important matters to discuss with Priest Lu Chen in detail. Without being summoned, no one was to disturb him. Therefore, Yezi was blocked outside the door. She was helpless about it, but she was also a little curious about what the two important people were talking about. In the stone house, the two most powerful people of the Black Fire tribe, who had unified the northern part of the wilderness for the past 100 years, began to chat. "Have you had breakfast?" Hui Yen replied. "Not yet. I just got up." Lu Chen replied. He then asked, "What about you?" "Well, I haven't eaten either. But it doesn't matter. It'll be noon soon. I'll eat that meal together with it." "That makes sense." Lu Chen nodded in agreement. Then, the two looked at each other and didn't say anything. After a while, Hui Yen finally cursed and spat out a few more curses. He then said angrily, "Forget it. Let's not talk nonsense, okay? These words make me feel disgusted." Lu Chen laughed. He touched the thick and smooth fur on the back of Atsu. He smiled and said, "If you have anything to say, just say it." Hui Yen nodded. After thinking for a while, his face slowly became serious. He looked deeply at Lu Chen and suddenly said, "You want to go back to the north?" Lu Chen raised his eyelids slightly and said calmly, "Yes. Didn't I tell you this from the beginning?" Hui Yen seemed to have given up. He said, "Are you really not tempted by what I said before? As long as you stay and help the Black Fire tribe, we will definitely give you unimaginable rewards." Lu Chen shook his head. He obviously didn't care about this suggestion. He only smiled and said, "Say it. What do you want to tell me today?" A trace of disappointment flashed across Hui Yan's eyes, but he quickly composed himself and said solemnly, "I've thought about it. Since you're so eager to return, and you've helped the Black Fire tribe so much these days, I can't make things difficult for you. I think I can tell you the secret of returning to the north." Lu Chen suddenly raised his head. He seemed to be shocked. Even with his calmness, he couldn't help but show a stunned expression. He said, "You're that good?" Hui Yen stared at him and said in a low voice, "We've known each other for a while. We can be considered friends. I won't lie to you about this." Lu Chen had already calmed down, but his eyes were still moving. His gaze flickered. He was obviously trying to guess the meaning behind Hui Yan's words. After a while, Hui Yen continued, "However, I'm sure you're aware of the current situation in our tribe. From the beginning to the end, we only have you as our priest. Although we have unified the northern part of the wasteland, we have also attracted the attention of the strongest tribes in the south. Under these circumstances, as long as you leave this place, we will not be able to resist the other priests, shamans, and venerables." Lu Chen nodded slowly, but didn't say anything. He only looked at Hui Yen, obviously waiting for him to continue. "I can tell you the secret in advance, before you complete the difficult task for the Black Fire tribe. At the same time, I can let you return to your hometown. However, there are many strong tribes in the south. Once you leave, the Black Fire tribe may fall into the awkward situation of not having a priest again. At that time, I'm afraid it will be difficult to even subdue these black fire guards, not to mention other tribes taking the opportunity to attack. Lu Qin was silent. After a while, he said, "Then what do you want me to do? Before I tell you the secret, you have to return at least 1 or 2 priests to me. Then you can leave. In the future, the barbarian tribe will return to the barbarian tribe, and the human tribe will go to the human tribe. There will be no more ties. How about that?" Lu Qin nodded slowly and said, "That would be best. However, I also have something to ask you." "Go ahead," Huiyan said. Lu Qin smiled and said, "In order to achieve the results you mentioned, I naturally have to find people in the tribe. But after searching for a few candidates, in fact, these few people in the tribe recently, we only want pure-blooded warriors from the Black Fire tribe." Huiyan suddenly interrupted him, and then said resolutely and decisively. Lu Qin was stunned and said, "What do you mean? Do you look down on the other barbarians?" Huiyan shook his head, but quickly nodded. "After all, they are our own people. I feel more at ease using them," he said. Lu Qin was silent for a while and said, "All right, I understand." Chapter 352. There was a moment of silence in the priest's stone house. For a long time, neither of them spoke, and the atmosphere became somewhat stiff. After a while, Lu Qin suddenly said, "Why are you suddenly not anxious anymore?" Huiyan looked up at him. Lu Qin looked at this barbarian and said, "All along, the one who was most anxious to restore the Black Fire tribe to its former glory was you. For this, you didn't even want to wait a few more years, waiting until you officially became the chief before you started. Why do you suddenly want to calm down now?" Huiyan was silent for a moment and said, "You are right, I was originally extremely anxious. In the wilderness, a barbarian's life is not very long, unless he is a priest or shaman with powerful witchcraft. But I don't have that. I'm not afraid of death, I'm only afraid that before I die, the Black Fire tribe will still be in this half-dead state." Lu Qin nodded and said, "I understand your intentions, but why did you suddenly change your mind? If I'm not wrong, before this war, there were many people in the Black Fire tribe who doubted you and thought that your actions were too radical. But after we defeated the Thunder Lizard tribe and unified the North, the entire Black Fire tribe has already bowed down to you. Many of the young barbarian tribe's warriors are crying out for you. What they want the most is to follow you to the south and fight against those southern tribes, right? The right time, the right place, and the right people. Now that everything is on your side, why did you change your mind?" Lu Qin stared at him and asked, "Are they really all on our side?" Huiyan suddenly asked in return. Lu Qin's expression did not change, and he said lightly, "Isn't it?" Huiyan snorted and leaned back against the wall. His voice was low as he slowly said, "The people of our barbarian race are brave and strong, but their minds are simple. No matter what we see, we will only think of some simple things. Except for those high and mighty priests and shamans who are like gods, ordinary people can't see the long term at all." After defeating the Thunder Lizard tribe, I was also overjoyed. I also had the ambition to go south. But these days, every night I can't sleep. He gestured to Lu Qin, pointed at his finger, and then pointed at his heart. Lu Qin didn't know what he meant. Finally, he sighed and said with a blank expression, "At first, I didn't know why, so I thought hard. After thinking for a long time, I suddenly realized that the Black Fire tribe couldn't go on like this. Our Black Fire tribe has been on the decline for many years. No matter how deep our foundation and depth we have, we are still just a small tribe. Our strength is just that, even if we have you as our priest. We swept through the northern part of the wilderness not because we were too strong, but because the other 4 tribes were too weak. We could only do this because this area was too barren, and the powerful tribes in the south didn't care about it. If we overestimate ourselves and continue to go south, then what awaits us is death, isn't that right?" Huiyan slowly lowered his head and clenched his teeth. "I won't say these words to anyone else. Even if I did, they wouldn't understand. Who knows, they might even think of betraying me. The only person who can understand me is you, right?" Lu Qin coldly looked at the barbarian. His eyes gradually turned from gentle to cold. It was as if he was staring at the barbarian with an icy cold sword. After a while, he slowly nodded and said, "You're right." Hui Yen looked at him, his gaze also containing some coldness and complicated emotions. However, his voice was still calm as he said, "I feel that you are the smartest person I have ever met in my life. You must have thought of these things a long time ago. But now, I'm very curious. You obviously knew this, why didn't you tell me?" He stared at him and lowered his voice, like a beast full of wariness and murderous intent, hibernating in the darkness and ready to pounce. Or, in fact, you just wanted to see us, the Black Fire tribe, like fools, rush south and be doomed eternally? The stone house was quiet, and the atmosphere was so tense that it seemed to solidify. The two men looked at each other in the darkness. After a while, Lu Chen slowly said, "You're smarter and calmer than I thought. I'm hesitating now, maybe I should try to kill you." Standing outside the house, Yi felt a little thirsty. Maybe she had waited here for too long. On this day, the chief Hui Yen came to talk to the black-robed priest, but it took a long time. She had waited outside for half a day, but there was no response from the dark house, as if no one was inside. However, the Black Fire guards and the trusted warriors brought by the chief Hui Yen were still standing there, indicating that there were two of the most powerful people in the Black Fire tribe in the house, and they seemed to be still discussing something. He sat to the side, bored. For some reason, she suddenly remembered the scene a few days ago when the black-robed priest suddenly had a ball of black flame in his hand. She remembered that at that time, she felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen, as if something was about to break out of her body. It was very scary. She also remembered that at the same time, the black-robed priest looked at her. After the initial shock, it was followed by a deep and bottomless gaze. Until now, Yi did not know what happened that day, but she could still keenly feel that recently, whenever the black-robed priest looked at her, there seemed to be something in his eyes that she could not explain. She stretched out a palm and placed it in front of herself. Compared to most tribal barbarians, her palm was relatively small and white, which was very rare. But when she was still in the old tribe, she was often nagged by the aunts and aunties in the tribe because of this. They said that she was not suited to work, and that she could not do things neatly, and that she would probably not be able to serve her husband well in the future. Yi used to be very ashamed and worried about this, but after so many years, in the end, it was still like this. In the end, the Divine Wood tribe was destroyed, and there was nothing more to say. But at this moment, she suddenly felt a kind of excitement in her heart. The mysterious black flame in the black-robed priest's hand, although it looked scary, seemed to have a kind of exciting power. If only she had this kind of power, how good would that be? She gently waved her hand, trying to make various gestures, imagining a strange scene in her heart, imagining that there might be a ball of black flame spewing out from her white palm. Lu Chen suddenly turned his head, looking outside the house. Hui Yen saw his movement, his eyebrows slightly wrinkled. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then shook his head. "Nothing." Hui Yen grunted and said, "That's good. But just now, you said that you want to kill me?" Lu Chen did not have any intention of retreating. He even raised his head and looked straight at Hui Yen. After a moment, he suddenly smiled. "Yes." Hui Yen also laughed and said, "You can kill me?" Lu Chen said, "Perhaps there is a little possibility." Hui Yen was silent for a moment, then nodded. "You are a priest, you naturally have methods that I do not know of, I believe this. But first, I will not let myself be captured, and second, there is no benefit in killing me, right? Also," he looked deeply at Lu Chen, "I originally thought that the relationship between us could be considered as a kind of friend." Lu Chen shook his head. "There is no benefit in killing you, but you are a person who knows when to yield and when to stand tall. You are strong and decisive. Not to mention the barbarians, even among the people I have seen in the northern human race, there are not many people like you." He looked at Hui Yen, quietly said, "I am a little afraid that in the future, you will not be an ordinary person. Once the wind and clouds gather, perhaps you will make a great achievement. At that time, if you are still in the southern wilderness, then naturally there is no harm. But if you lead the army to the north, won't our human race be tormented by the army?" Hui Yen looked into his eyes, his gaze firm and fearless. You think too highly of me, but what I should do, I will still do. And you can't kill me, you still need that secret, right? Perhaps in a few years, I will die in this wasteland. What do you think? Hui Yan revealed a faint smile as he spoke to Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded. You're right. I want that secret. I want to leave this place and return to the north. He paused for a moment before continuing, I won't kill you. I'll even help you. Hui Yan smiled, nodded his head. Lu Chen looked at his smile, his face expressionless, and said indifferently, If I am not wrong, you are temporarily in seclusion. It should be to tidy up the chaos in the wilderness. Once this is done, and your strength is enough, you still want to go south and fight against those strong tribes, right? At that time, the barbarians will kill the barbarians. Before you grow up, the stronger you are, the more barbarians will die, right? Lu Chen looked at him and said. Hui Yan's face instantly became cold. A smile floated in Lu Chen's eyes with a bit of coldness, but his expression became gentle. You see, I can even do you a big favor. Hui Yan coldly said, What is it? Lu Chen leisurely said, Since ancient times, you ordinary barbarians have probably crawled under the feet of the priests and shamans. If I tell you, there is actually a way that you can control them. Hui Yan suddenly stood up, his eyes revealing a look of disbelief, staring at Lu Chen. Even his voice was a bit shaky. What did you say? Lu Chen smiled. As long as you agree to my conditions, I will teach you. Chapter 353. Whoosh! A gust of cold wind blew past the Blackfire camp. Yi was so bored that she started to doze off. In the past, these two big shots had met and talked about many things, but none of their meetings were as long as today's. She swung her arms casually. Before this, she had tried to cast a spell like the black-robed priest, but the result was no surprise. She was still a mortal, and the powerful and mysterious power did not bother her at all. Yi was not disappointed, of course. This was how it should be. She raised her head to look at the sky, only to find that it was already noon. Just as she was considering if she should find a place to fill her stomach, there was a sudden movement from the priest's stone house. Then, the guards and soldiers who were standing lazily at the door all straightened up. A moment later, Chief Hui Yan and Priest Lu Chen walked out together. They walked side by side with calm expressions on their faces. They didn't even look at their surroundings as they walked towards the exit of the camp. The surrounding guards followed them, but very quickly, the two of them waved their hands to signal the others not to follow them. Everyone was stunned and stopped walking, looking at each other. However, the status of these two big shots was simply too important. No matter who it was, they couldn't allow anything to happen to them. Thus, after opening up a distance, the guards still followed from afar under the lead of Tai Xiong and the others. Looking ahead, Hui Yan and Lu Chen did not have much of a reaction, as if they did not care. They walked all the way to the exit of the camp and stood side by side. In front of them was the vast wasteland illuminated by the noon sun. It was barren and vast, and there were specks of green in the yellow, as if it was a symbol of indomitable life. The sky was azure, as if it had been washed by water. It looked like a beautiful and huge sapphire. When there was no one nearby, Lu Chen looked at the blue sky and suddenly asked, Do you believe in God? Of course. Hui Yan said matter-of-factly, Our Black Fire tribe has believed in God for generations. The Fire God is our ancestor and the source of our power. Everything in our tribe comes from the Fire God's gift to us. We are the descendants of the Fire God. Lu Chen nodded lightly and said, But as far as I know, almost all tribes have their own gods that they believe in. If this is true, then no matter how vast the sky is, it can't contain so many gods, right? Hui Yan's expression changed and he said in a low voice, What do you mean? Most of the tribes in the wasteland live in the more fertile lands in the south. There are thousands of tribes, but how can there be so many gods in this world? Also, as far as I know, there are at least dozens of different gods that your tribes believe in. They all claim that there is only one God in the heavens and earth. Of them. He turned his head and looked at Hui Yan with a smile that was not a smile. So, among the countless tribes in this wasteland, there must be many people and tribes who are lying, right? Hui Yan seemed to be angry, but he quickly suppressed it. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "What do you want to say to me?" Lu Chen stared at him for a long time, and then slowly approached him. In a voice that only Hui Yan could hear, he said, word by word, "I don't believe in God." Hui Yan's face suddenly turned red, and his chest rose and fell violently. The sharp fangs in his mouth made a terrifying grinding sound. But even though he was so angry, he still surprisingly restrained his anger and did not attack the non-believer in front of him. However, as a priest, Lu Chen did not have any intention of stopping. He continued to stare at the furious barbarian. His gaze was like a knife that could pierce through his soul. He said softly, "Isn't that right? With your intelligence and wisdom, it's impossible that you haven't thought about this for so many years, right? You must have doubts in your heart, but it is impossible to say it in the tribe, right? Because in all the lands of the wasteland, there is no one who doesn't believe in God. If you say this, it means that no one will tolerate you and everyone will kill you, right?" Hui Yan suddenly let out a low roar. His eyes were faintly bloodshot, and his fangs straightened. One of his hands was already on the sharp hilt of the sword at his waist. Lu Chen looked at his hand, and after a moment of silence, said, "Actually, from the beginning, I felt that it was too strange that you wanted to bring me back at all costs. Even if you used the will of God as an excuse, but at the beginning, I did not go through the test of the fire god's altar. No one could be sure that the power in my body came from the fire god. Moreover, I am not even a barbarian, but a human that has not appeared for thousands of years. In your heart, there is an even more secret matter, right? Because in the depths of your heart, you are the only barbarian in thousands of years who dared to doubt God. That is why you wanted me to come here. You felt that I was the only person who could possibly doubt God. Only by doing so, perhaps you would not feel too lonely in your heart, or perhaps you would not be tormented by the lingering thoughts of yes and no until you go crazy. Am I right, Huyen, chief?" Lu Chen looked into the eyes of the tall and burly barbarian and calmly said, "Follow me." Huyen suddenly said to Lu Chen, and then strode into the wasteland. Lu Chen did not hesitate and immediately followed. At this time, the guards who were still watching the two of them from afar in the tribe's camp and were endlessly shocked by Huyen's strange actions and expressions were about to run over, but were once again stopped by Huyen. This time, Huyen's face was solemn, his expression stern, and he sternly scolded. Everyone was shocked, but in the end, they did not dare to disobey his orders. They stayed in the camp and watched the two people walk into the depths of the wasteland. The two of them walked to a patch of wild grass. The wild grass was yellow, and there was a hint of green in it. It rose and fell with the wind, desperately grabbing at the soil on the ground and absorbing all the water and nutrients from the soil so that it could persevere and survive. Standing in this patch of wild grass, Huyen's expression became somewhat strange. It was unknown when the anger had disappeared from his face, but his gaze was exceptionally deep and reserved, as if there were countless secrets in his heart, pressing down on this barbarian to the point that he could not breathe. "How is this place?" Lu Chen looked around and nodded, "Not bad." Huyen turned his head to look at him and said, "It is a good place to bury corpses." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Indeed." After that, the two of them did not speak and only looked at each other. After an unknown period of time, Huyen suddenly opened his mouth. "You can obviously hide these words in your heart and treat them as your secrets. Why did you say them to me? Do you remember the method that I just told you about that might be able to control the priests and shamans?" Lu Chen said, "That method first requires one to not believe in the gods, and then one can clearly see the essence of witchcraft and then find the loopholes. And at the same time, those who still believe in the power of the gods will turn a blind eye to this. Even if they are tightly controlled by you, they will not be able to resist. How is it? With such a method, is it possible for you to betray your gods and beliefs?" Huyen looked at him coldly and pointed in the direction of the tribe's camp in the distance and said, "Like those people who have been exterminated? It's not the same. They still have to choose a god, but you completely do not believe in any of them. From now on, There will be no gods, no ancestors, and no restrictions or beliefs in your heart, only. Lu Chen said. Power. Chapter 354. I feel like you are an evil spirit, Hui Yan suddenly said. Why? Hui Yan looked at this man in a black robe. Even though he was standing under the midday sun, he still seemed to be shrouded in a shadow. He said, Ever since I met you, you have always been accompanied by blood and slaughter. I don't know how many people have died because of you. Other than those dead people, I also feel that you have always been pulling me in one direction, pulling me into the shadow beside you. That blood and slaughter, isn't that what you have always dreamed of? Lu Chen retorted, Have you ever thought that maybe you're the evil spirit and I'm just helping you out? Or maybe I was forced to do so by you? Hui Yan stared into Lu Chen's eyes. His eyes were bloodshot. He took a step forward, and his voice seemed to have become a little hoarse. How dare you speak of me like that? Lu Chen showed no fear. There was even a hint of a cold smile on his face. At that moment, he seemed to have completely transformed into a cold and emotionless evil spirit. He held an invisible and cold blade in his hand, and slashed at the heart of this barbarian. Could it be that what I said was not the truth? He said and then laughed coldly. This time, Hui Yan was silent for a long time. Perhaps with the passage of time, the originally tense atmosphere between them gradually eased. After a while, Hui Yan's expression gradually calmed down. When he looked at Lu Chen again, there was an additional complicated expression in his eyes. However, he spoke half honestly and half seriously. I had originally thought that perhaps we could become friends, but from the looks of it, that is not possible. Lu Chen shook his head and said calmly, A friend would not threaten me like this. Hui Yan nodded and said, You are right. I have been wrong from the beginning. But it does not matter. Even after you leave, as long as I am here, the Black Fire tribe will not collapse. We will continue to follow the glory of our ancestors. As he spoke, he lowered his head slightly, his eyes drifting as if he was looking at an unknown place in this grassland. After a moment, he said, Tell me the method that can control the priests. If it really works, I will tell you the secret path to the north and let you leave. Lu Chen agreed without any hesitation. A gale blew across the wasteland, causing this patch of wild grass to sway and make whistling sounds. Just as they were about to return, Lu Chen asked Hui Yan, I heard that these days, when you have nothing to do, you often come here to walk and meditate? Hui Yan was startled for a moment before he shook his head and said, I don't come here often. I only occasionally feel bored and come out for a walk. Lu Chen said, This place is not bad. Hui Yan was silent for a moment before saying, What do you want to say? Lu Chen said, I heard that when your son Hua Ying and a group of old fellows joined forces to oppose you, they were chased away here after they failed. Hui Yan raised his head and looked deeply at Lu Chen. After a while, he nodded and said, Yes. Lu Chen shrugged and said, I did not know about this at the time. Otherwise, I would have advised you not to let him go. But Lu Chen said indifferently, Hua Ying and you have the same bloodline. In the wilderness where the inheritance of tribal bloodlines is highly valued, he is naturally the successor of the Black Fire tribe. He is also the only person who can threaten you. Hui Yan's expression changed and he said angrily, What do you mean? Do you want me to kill my only son with my own hands? Your thoughts are so malicious that even the evil spirits cannot compare to you. Lu Chen stared at him and sighed after a while. He shook his head and said, Actually, that is not what I mean. I am just reminding you that there is such a possibility. If I was here that day, I would have asked you to imprison him in the tribe instead of chasing him away. This way, there may be some hidden dangers in the future. Hui Yan's face was still ashen as he said coldly, This is my family's business. You do not need to worry about it. Lu Chen did not feel offended. He also seemed to be a little tired. He smiled bitterly and said, Forget it. This is also good. At least no matter you or me, we still have a little bit of humanity left in us. We will not become real evil spirits. Let's go. He waved his hand and turned to walk towards the tribe's camp. But at this moment, Hui Yan's voice suddenly came from behind. He said, Do you have any family or friends in the north? Lu Chen's body paused. He said, "Why do you ask this?" Hui Yen said, "With your cold and callous will, your heartless temperament, I can't imagine that you have a family. Every single person by your side, will they all meet with misfortune in the end? Will there not be a single one with a good ending?" Lu Chen's body suddenly trembled. At that moment, his hands that were hanging in his sleeves suddenly clenched tightly, his nails digging deep into his flesh. He looked towards the distant north. Under the distant sky, there was a vast expanse of emptiness. He sneered and wanted to ridicule this barbarian who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth and was full of nonsense. But when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly did not make a sound. He could not say those words of rebuttal and ridicule. He did not turn back. In the end, he only walked away silently without saying a word. "Evil spirit, he, you are the real evil spirit." Hui Yen muttered to himself as he waited for the figure to disappear into the distance. His expression at that moment was somewhat strange, green and white, his eyes moving. He slowly turned around and looked at the desolate grassland in front of him and behind him. The weeds were overgrown, as if there was a painful life struggling and crying out on this barren land. His face suddenly turned white, and there was some fear in his eyes. But very quickly, this fear was dispelled by an even greater power. He took a deep breath and then walked forward. The weeds trembled under his feet and were stepped into the dry and barren soil. There was only the wind on the wasteland, blowing mournfully, like the roar of an evil spirit. In the depths of the wasteland, Hui Yen found a large rock. It was pressed down on a patch of weeds, its entire body covered with sharp and rough edges. Hui Yen looked at this rock in a daze for a while, then walked over and slowly sat on the rock. The cold wind blew past, and the smell of fresh weeds surged over. He slightly lowered his head and saw the broken wounds and scattered leaves on the stems of the weeds. They were pressed down by the rock and could not move. He sat alone and quietly, and then suddenly slowly held his head with his hands, burying his entire head in his knees, and curling his entire body into a ball. "Evil spirit!" He gave a low roar, his voice trembling and mournful. It was as if a terrifying ghost had appeared in front of him, wanting to completely devour him, wanting to drag him into the yellow springs of hell. "Devil!" he screamed again in a hoarse voice. But in this wasteland, there was only the cold wind that responded to his voice. Ghost? His last voice, powerlessly scattered in the wind, in this corner where no one could hear or see, with all of his weakness and evil, he disappeared into the shadows. Unknowingly, the sky had darkened, and night was about to arrive. Chapter 355. On that day in the desolate meadow, after their naked conversation, Hui Yen returned to the camp and locked himself in his residence. He did not come out for a whole 10 days. On the 11th day, Hui Yen, who looked like he had lost a lot of weight, found Lu Chen. In the dark priest's stone house, Hui Yen opened his mouth. He looked tired and a little pained, but more than that, he had an uncontrollable desire. "Tell me the method," he said. Lu Chen smiled in the dim shadows. Then, he took out the intact fire god's staff and threw it to Hui Yen. "The key lies in this." He smiled and looked satisfied. His whole person was gentle and polite. He did not look like a person who would plant the seeds of hatred in this tribe and lay the groundwork for the future bloody battles of the tribe. Did this man ever think of this? Hui Yen looked at the black-robed priest in silence, then looked at the fire god's staff in his hand. He slowly tightened his grip on it and closed his eyes. The Black Fire tribe, which had suddenly risen like a raging fire and swept across the northern part of the wilderness in the blink of an eye like a raging tide, was originally a mysterious tribe. Especially when their actions were gradually attracting the attention of the more powerful tribes in the south, the Black Fire tribe suddenly stopped in their tracks. There was almost no sign in between. The Black Fire tribe seemed to have become harmless all of a sudden, calmly staying in the northern part of the wilderness. This made the originally worried southern tribes heave a sigh of relief. From the reports of their spies, every piece of information showed that the Black Fire tribe seemed to be really satisfied. Their ambitions were limited to the barren northern land. They were in awe of the large tribes in the southern wilderness, as well as the many powerful shamans, venerables, and high priests of the war god temple. They even offered expensive gifts. Of course, what good things could there be in that barren wasteland? They didn't care about it at all. However, the chiefs were more interested in the Black Fire tribe's submissive attitude. In comparison, the war god temple, which stood at the top of the wasteland, wasn't interested in the small tribe that had just risen up in the north. However, after hearing that the tribe had risen because they had found a new high priest, one of the venerables in the war god temple seemed to have paid attention to this. He ordered a few high priests to go to the north to take a look and figure out the situation. At the same time, some people in the war god temple remembered that a rising priest of the temple had gone to the mountain spirit tribe in the north some time ago, but there was no news of him since then. It was said that the mountain spirit tribe had been destroyed in the war with the Black Fire tribe, and the priest had gone missing. The shamans and venerables didn't care about this matter, but there were still a few good friends of the priest in the war god temple. They secretly pushed for an investigation of what had happened. In short, during the period of the sudden rise of the Black Fire tribe, the world was still developing peacefully. As for the undercurrents under the calm, most people wouldn't know about it. Time passed day by day. The Black Fire tribe wasn't actually very peaceful. There were always many things happening every day. It wasn't easy for the few tribes that had been destroyed by the Black Fire tribe and the captives that were captured to integrate into the Black Fire tribe. They were resistant, and the people from the Black Fire tribe often didn't like them. In the most important aspect of faith, even though Lu Chen and Hui Yen had forcefully suppressed it from the beginning and forced the tribesmen to give up their faith in the god, it wasn't that easy. Therefore, they still found and captured many people who had secretly worshipped the god. Hui Yen didn't show them any mercy and killed them in front of the entire tribe. The blood shocked and frightened the people. This temporarily suppressed the matter, but there were still more troublesome things. The sudden rise of the Black Fire tribe had caused the ambition of the young and proud barbarian warriors of the tribe to soar. They had plundered a lot of wealth, women, and servants through the war of slaughtering the other tribes, but they still wanted more. They wanted to go south. They wanted to wield their blood-stained blades and rob the rich tribes in the south. Legend had it that the southern and southern regions were the real paradise, with mountains of gold and seas of silver, milk flowing everywhere, and beautiful women like immortals. Hui Yen had a headache dealing with these simple-minded fools. They were idiots, but he had to be clear-headed. Fortunately, these days, his prestige in the Black Fire tribe had risen. No one dared to openly defy him, so he managed to suppress the matter. However, similar disputes and requests would still pop up every 2 or 3 days, making him very annoyed. In contrast, Lu Chen's life was much more relaxed. He had never cared about these trivial matters of the Black Fire tribe. Even if it was his idea to capture captives, replenish the population of the Black Fire tribe, and force them to give up their faith, it was also his idea. But now, he seemed to have nothing to do with it, as if this matter had nothing to do with him. He was beginning to prepare for his return to the north. Coming to the southern wilderness was a complete accident for Lu Chen. He had no feelings for this vast land, nor did he have any sense of belonging to the barbarians here. He was like a passerby, coldly watching everything that happened here. Perhaps it was because of this mentality that the decisions he made in the process of helping Hui Yen revive the Black Fire tribe were especially cold-blooded and unyielding. Perhaps he didn't care about the blood that was spilled and the people that died in the process. If he could, he even wanted to leave immediately. But of course, this matter couldn't be so casual. Hui Yen and the Black Fire tribe still had many things that they needed his help with. The first was the problem of a new priest. And this would also take a long time. Fortunately, Lu Chen had already cultivated a patience that was hard to be matched by ordinary people in his past life as a shadow. Like the Black Fire tribe, he silently went into hiding and then did what he had to do, while waiting for Hui Yan's decision. In the selection of a new priest, Hui Yan had been very determined to reject outsiders, and insisted on only choosing his own children who were born in the Black Fire tribe. But this decision was quickly shaken after he learned the secret from Lu Chen. At the same time, Luchin also told him once again that there was no suitable candidate in the Black Fire tribe. This is impossible. That night, after confirming the news from Luchin, almost half of the Black Fire camp could hear the roar coming from the Dark Priest's stone house. But although they were angry, it didn't have much use. On the last piece of paper that Luchin handed over, Huyen quickly fell into silence as he looked at the names written on it. Luchin sat down beside him and said, "In this tribe's camp, I found a total of 7 people who have the potential to be a priest. 1 from the Mountain Spirit tribe, 2 from the Sacred Wood tribe, and the most from the Thunder Lizard tribe, with 4. Luchin didn't say anything else, but his meaning was very clear. The rest would be decided by Huyen. Huyen was silent for a long time, then lowered his voice and said, "If this thing is made public, I'm afraid that the brothers of the Black Fire tribe will rebel. They might even raise their weapons and kill people." He raised his head to look at Luchin and said with a rare serious expression, "Is there really no one in the Black Fire tribe? Even if there is one, it will be enough." Luchin shook his head and said, "I can't find one." The muscles on Huyen's face contorted as he stared at the piece of paper. Abruptly, his gaze froze as though he had discovered something. Furrowing his brows, he asked Luchin, "This person named Yi, could it be that she's your serving girl?" "Yes," Luchin replied. Chapter 356. In the end, Huyen gave in on the matter of choosing a priest. Or perhaps it was not appropriate to say that, because neither Luchin nor Huyen had a better choice. Huyen did not want to believe that there was no one suitable to be a priest among so many people in his tribe, but the truth was right in front of him. At the same time, it once again dealt a heavy blow to his reverence for the fire god that his tribe worshipped. Therefore, in the following days, although this barbarian became more and more silent, his cooperation with Luchin became more and more tacit. The secret that Luchin told Huyen was actually not complicated. Under the situation where the inheritance of the ancient priests of the Black Fire tribe was broken, the power of the Black Fire that appeared in the tribe was inherited through the fire god's staff. Luchin also went to the fire god's altar with Huyen, and after obtaining the complete fire god's staff, he obtained the Black Fire witchcraft that had been passed down through the generations of the Black Fire tribe. And during this time, Luchin discovered a secret. The fire god's staff was indeed a powerful artifact. It was so powerful that it could even control the priests who inherited the power from it. As long as the first black fire in one's body was obtained from the fire god's staff, and used it as a foundation to practice witchcraft, they would never be able to get rid of the fire god's staff's restriction. In other words, whoever controlled this artifact would have absolute control over the many priests who were enlightened by the fire god's staff. It was definitely enough to make them unable to resist even if they died. As for Luchin, he was an exception, because the power of the black fire in his body did not originate from the fire god's staff. After knowing this secret, Huyen's confidence increased greatly. After careful consideration, he finally cast aside his worries and began to nurture the next generation of priests of the Black Fire tribe. And during this process, Luchin also cooperated and selected some of the witchcraft that he had comprehended to pass on to the newcomers. However, unexpected troubles still occurred. The witchcraft inheritance of this tribe was indeed mysterious and unimaginable danger. Even Luchin himself could not explain it clearly. There were a total of 7 barbarian priest candidates. After Huyen personally used the fire god's staff to enlighten them and pass on the power of the black flame, they seemed to be normal at first. However, after they continued to practice, an abnormal situation occurred after only 2 months. People started dying. The first to die was a barbarian man from the Thunder Lizard tribe. One morning, he walked out of his house in a good mood. In fact, no matter what, the Thunder Lizard tribe had already been destroyed, and he himself was just an ordinary person in the tribe. He was captured by the Black Fire tribe and thought that he would suffer a lot or even lose his life. Who knew that he would have the chance to become a priest that he didn't even dare to dream of in the past? It was impossible for him not to be happy. However, it was precisely this optimistic person who was looking forward to the future. That morning, in front of many people of the Black Fire tribe, when he was walking towards the black-robed priest's stone house to receive training, a huge black flame suddenly burst out from his body and engulfed him in a frenzy. The barbarian screamed and screamed, but it was of no use. The black flame engulfed him, and under the horrified gazes of the crowd, he died in extreme pain. This matter quickly caused a stir in the entire Black Fire tribe. Countless people whispered and discussed about it. Some people were gloating, some said that it was a punishment from the gods. But all the voices were suppressed in the end, because whether it was Hui Yen or Lu Chen, they had no way out. After this first accident, the following days were no longer peaceful. All kinds of mysterious and strange phenomena began to gradually occur. Among the 7 people, one from the Thunder Lizard tribe died. Then, after another half a month, another suddenly went crazy. It happened without any warning. In the morning, he seemed to be completely fine, but suddenly he went crazy. He grabbed people he saw on the road and madly bit them like a dog. After being subdued by the guards who rushed over, the man still couldn't calm down and became unreasonably violent. After being locked in a cage, he continued to roar day and night. That mournful voice reverberated in the sky above the Black Fire tribe's camp every night, like the most terrifying curse in the world. 3 days later, this madman died. Then, after another month, the 3rd person died. His death was extremely strange. His entire body and limbs fell off inexplicably, and then he died silently. It was said that the person's expression was still very peaceful, as if he had suddenly died in his sleep. With such strange things happening one after another, the entire Black Fire tribe began to panic. Even a strong leader like Hui Yen was under great pressure at this moment. When the situation was at its most tense, there were all kinds of rumors circulating in the Black Fire tribe. Many said that the fire god was enraged and sent down divine punishment, or that the fire god was angry that his power had been stolen by outsiders and so on. Even when Hui Yen repeatedly explained that he had absolute control over the fire god's staff, he could not stop the spread of such rumors. Fortunately, after that, this phenomenon temporarily quieted down. The remaining 4 people did not experience any more strange things, and gradually obtained the power of the Black Fire through cultivation. Although they were still far from Lu Chen, the growth of the priests had always been slow. They were the norm, and people like Lu Chen were the abnormal ones. After a year, everything finally calmed down. The power of the Black Fire tribe grew day by day, and the new priests began to really understand the power of witchcraft. At the same time, just as Lu Chen had planned, they could not escape the control of the fire god's staff, and could only listen to the orders of Hui Yen, who had the fire god's staff. Lu Chen did what he had to do, and Hui Yen did not lie to him. He told him the secret way to return north. That way is in the Great Snow Mountain. When that day came, Hui Yen told Lu Chen the secret that he had hidden deep in his heart. The Great Snow Mountain is snowy all year round, and frozen for tens of thousands of miles. But for 3 days a year, there is a hidden canyon in the mountain where the wind and snow will stop. In between the cliffs, there is a dangerous path that leads to the land of confusion. Lu Chen looked deeply at this barbarian, frowned, and asked, "You walked through that dangerous path?" Hui Yen shook his head and said in a low voice, "That path is not for humans. It is too dangerous, I dare not walk it." Lu Chen stared at him and questioned, "Then how do you know that it leads to the land of confusion in the north?" Hui Yen said, "Because I once saw a huge demonic beast leap over that ravine. In its bloody mouth, there was a corpse's remains. I could tell that it wasn't a barbarian." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. Hui Yen continued, "Other than the strongest demon beasts, it is impossible for humans to survive on the Great Snow Mountain. Whether it is the human race or the barbarian race, it is impossible. There have been no humans in the wasteland for many years, so that demon beast must have come from the land of confusion." He then sighed and said, "I swear to the heavens that these words are absolutely true. However, that path is indeed too dangerous, and you will most likely die if you go there. Lu Chen, I will say the same thing. As long as you are willing to stay and work hard with me in the future, I will share all the glory and wealth with you." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then said, "There is no need, I will try." He then paused and asked casually, "What did that giant beast look like?" It looked like a giant wolf." "Giant wolf?" "Yes." Hui Yen thought for a moment, then used his finger to point at the big black dog lying lazily beside Lu Chen. "It looks a bit like it, but it's much bigger than it." Chapter 357. The night before he left the Black Fire tribe, Lu Chen stayed alone in the priest's stone house. He had lived in this dark stone house for a long time. Now that he had decided to leave, he looked around and found that there was actually nothing he was reluctant to part with. Perhaps he had never had any feelings or nostalgia for anything in this wilderness. Sometimes, Lu Chen even felt that his coming to the southern wilderness might just be a joke of fate. When he stayed here, he did not leave behind anything too good, probably only the seeds of hatred and all kinds of blood and killing. In the dark stone house, other than him, there was only Atu. In the past year, this huge black wolf seemed to have grown even fatter. The reason was probably because he had been eating well. Although the northern part of the wilderness was still barren, now that the Black Fire tribe had unified the north and taken in the 4 tribes, their sphere of influence had expanded rapidly. Their territory had become larger, and the food they obtained was several times more than before. With the help of the black-robed priest, Atsu was now living like a celestial dog. All he did was eat and sleep all day long. His life was too free and unfettered. Originally, there was another figure in this stone house. That was the original maid. However, after Lu Chen selected her as a possible candidate for the priestess, Yezi left the place and lived in the residence specially prepared for the new priestesses. Hui Yen had also discussed with Lu Chen about sending 2 more maids over. He even joked that perhaps the maids sent to him would also become priests after a period of time. Lu Chen directly refused. The night was cold, and Lu Chen was still awake. This night he seemed to be more awake than in the past. Then he suddenly missed the feeling of dreaming. Some time ago, on a night in this stone house, he suddenly had a dream. He dreamed of the dead Baldi Supreme Tianlan and himself when he was still young. He thought he had forgotten that childhood memory, but he found that he still remembered it. He found that he actually missed the dead Baldi. But when he appeared in front of that person again, how would he react? In this world, the only person that Lu Chen could not see through was probably him. Atu had already fallen into a deep sleep by his side. Although this black dog had experienced all kinds of pain in the past, but now that it was by Lu Chen's side, it seemed to have completely let down its guard, and trusting everything to its master, trusting him wholeheartedly. Well, a naturally lazy dog. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and touched the fur on Atsu's head. It was unusually soft and smooth. Then, he thought of what Hui Yen had told him that day, about the horrible demon that had appeared in the secret path of the Great Snow Mountain. Lu Chen had once questioned Hui Yen about why he had come to that exceptionally dangerous snowy mountain, and how he had avoided that terrifying demonic beast. However, Hui Yen had kept his mouth shut, only making a heavy oath to Lu Chen, indicating that what he had said was not a lie. Lu Chen could see that Hui Yen was not lying, but he could also imagine that the danger of that path was unimaginably great. It was very likely that he himself would not be able to walk through it. It was also because of this that Hui Yen, perhaps feeling a little guilty in his heart, came over several times to persuade him to stay in the Great Snow Mountain. However, Lu Chen still decided to leave. A long time ago, he had always felt that he was alone, without any worries. He could travel to the ends of the earth without any restraint, and anywhere was his home. However, it was only after he came to the Great Snow Mountain of the southern wilderness and spent several years here that he came to a realization. It turned out that there was always a yearning and nostalgia in everyone's heart. His heart still yearned for the vast divine continent of the human race in the north. Even if there were many people there who did not like him, hated him, and even wanted to kill him, he was still willing to live with the people there. He did not like the barbarians around him. Even if the people in the north liked to scheme and fight for power, he still liked that place. He belonged to the human race. This had never changed and would never change. The sound of footsteps came from outside the house, and was immediately stopped by someone. It was the Black Fire Guards who were guarding outside his stone house. Now, with the rapid increase in the strength of the Black Fire tribe, and the large number of captives from other tribes, the number of Black Fire Guards had also increased rapidly. Now, it had exceeded the number of warriors from the Black Fire tribe by almost half. It could be said that they were the most powerful force in the Black Fire tribe. Such a powerful force was enough to overturn everything, enough to destroy everything in this tribe. It was probably because of this that the Black Fire tribe, led by Hui Yen, were worried and dissatisfied. Lu Chen could imagine that no matter how dignified Hui Yan's many excuses were, and how he paid attention to friendship, dreams, and the glory of his ancestors, but the worry of the Black Fire Guards, this powerful force that he could not completely control, was perhaps the reason why he finally decided to tell Lu Chen the secret and let him leave. Lu Chen was not surprised by this. In his heart, which was not known to others, from the beginning, he had been deliberately working in this direction. The barbarians, especially those in the north of the wilderness, were mostly simple-minded. Even if there was an unusual person like Hui Yen, but in terms of scheming, they were still not as good as Lu Chen, who had been tempered in the devil cult for countless days since he was young. Of course, in the years after he left, what these people would become was not something that Lu Chen cared about. There was a low voice outside the door, but the reply that came made Lu Chen a little surprised. He had thought that it would be Hui Yen who would come at this time, because there was still a very important matter that Hui Yen had not gotten an answer from him. But now, it seemed that Hui Yen was more patient than he had expected. The person who came was a barbarian woman, who was once his maid. When Yi walked into the dimly lit stone house, she could not help but be in a trance for a moment. This year, for her, was also a time of great changes. When she was told that the black-robed priest had named her as a candidate for the priest, Ye's mind went blank. Even after such a long time, even though she had begun to come into contact with and master the power of witchcraft, Yi was still in awe of the black figure. But when she walked into the house, after the initial nervousness, she quickly felt a sense of familiarity, as if she had returned home. This feeling made her feel very strange, but she still carefully put away her feelings, came to the black-robed priest's seat, and silently knelt down. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "I have told you that you are now a tribal priest, so you don't have to sit in front of me like a maid." Ye's body moved, and after a moment of hesitation, she still knelt down and said, I will stay like this." Lu Chen no longer cared about her and said, "What's the matter? At this time, no one else has come, only you suddenly came to see me." Ye's face was a little blurred in the darkness. She could feel the black shadow in front of her, and the lazy dog sleeping on the other side. As a priest, she was now qualified to know some secrets, including that the person in front of her and the dog would leave tomorrow. As for where they were going, no one would say, and no one dared to ask. Probably in this tribe, only the chief Hui Yen knew. Seeing Ye's hesitation, Lu Chen frowned and said, "What is the matter?" Hearing his shout, Ye panicked. After such a long time, she still seemed to be the timid handmaiden in front of this black-robed priest. She was still unable to resist his majesty, and the fear of him seemed to follow her like a shadow that she could not get rid of. She nervously clenched her hands, and after a long hesitation, she whispered, "The chief asked me to come." Lu Chen's eyes flickered, and he seemed to be a little surprised by the answer. Then he seemed to think of something, and smiled faintly, saying, "It seems that I still overestimated him." Yi did not hear him clearly and asked in surprise. Lu Chen did not answer her and said, "What did he ask you to come here for?" Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Well, the chief said that you still have a very important thing here, and you have not given it to him. If you are leaving tomorrow morning, he asked me to come and get it and bring it to him." Lu Chen looked calm, sitting in the shadow, and did not have the slightest intention of returning the thing, nor did he speak. Yi waited for a while, only to feel that there was an invisible pressure gradually spreading in the surrounding darkness, making people feel a little breathless. After a long time, such a sentence suddenly came from the darkness, "What does he want? Let him come to me himself." Yi looked at him blankly, but did not dare to disobey this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, and nodded repeatedly. But soon she heard the voice of the black-robed priest say, "By the way, since you happen to be here, I have something and I will give it to you." Yi was taken aback and looked up in surprise and said, "Sir, what is it?" Lu Chen raised his hand, and a white thing flew out of the darkness and was thrown to Yi. Yi reached out and caught it. It was cold to the touch. She held it tight and looked down. Suddenly, her whole body trembled, and an indescribable complex expression appeared on her face. There was surprise, pain, hatred, fear, and even more sadness. In her hand was a white bone mask, which was the ancestral relic that Lu Chen had taken from her tribe on the day when the Divine Wood tribe was exterminated. "Sir, this is?" Yi asked in a trembling voice. "Well, this is something that belongs to your Divine Wood tribe. You keep it." Lu Chen's voice sounded a little erratic, but it seemed to have a deeper meaning. He said lightly, "Maybe you will need it in the future." Chapter 358. Lu Chen didn't tell Yi when and how this white bone mask, which was left behind by the ancestors of the Divine Wood tribe, would be useful in the future. Yezi wanted to ask, but Lu Chen had already chased her out before she could open her mouth. Yezi, who was full of doubts, did not dare to resist the mysterious black-robed priest. She could only retreat, and at the same time, she hid the white bone mask in her bosom and wrapped it tightly, afraid that it would be seen by others. No matter what, the Divine Wood tribe had been destroyed and disappeared from this wasteland. At this moment, in name, she and the remaining tribesmen were also part of the Black Fire tribe. If this item was seen and recognized by someone, it would probably cause an unfathomable storm. After all, in the past days, Yezi had seen with her own eyes the killing of those who still cherished their ancestors in front of the entire tribe more than once. But despite this danger, Yezi still accepted the white bone mask without any hesitation. When she left the dark stone house, she subconsciously looked to the side. The expressionless black fire guards only turned to look at her, and then looked away. Yezi breathed a sigh of relief, and hurriedly left the place. The sky was bright. Lu Chen walked out of the priest's stone house with Atsu. The people of the Black Fire tribe who had been waiting outside were already standing in a row. From the chief Hui Yen to the tribal generals like White Eagle, Iron Bear, Black Bull, and Yi and a group of new priests, almost all the important figures of the tribe were present. Around them, there were even more Black Fire guards standing there with complicated expressions. But when they saw Lu Chen, they were all taken aback. Because on this morning, under the light of dawn, the human man who had been in the image of a black-robed priest for a long time suddenly took off the black robe and changed into his original clothes. An indescribable subtle atmosphere slowly spread in this corner of the tribe's camp. When the black robe disappeared, people suddenly felt that there was a huge gap between them and Lu Chen. Before, people were in awe of this black-robed priest, afraid of his power and witchcraft. In this long period of time, they had even forgotten his original identity and regarded him as an extremely important member of the Black Fire tribe. But on this morning, everyone suddenly understood that he was about to leave. He would no longer have anything to do with this tribe. Or perhaps, there was a possibility that they would be enemies? No one spoke and no one came forward to greet him. The atmosphere in front of the priest's stone house was a little awkward, and there was a subtle tension. On one side was a lonely human, and on the other side was a huge crowd of more than 100 barbarians. Some people in the crowd could not help but look around, and some people stared at Lu Chen with sparkling eyes. Lu Chen walked until he was about 100 feet in front of the crowd and stopped. He looked at the people in front of him. There was not much expression on his calm face. On the other hand, the black wolf Atsu, who had followed him for a long time and had been eating and drinking, suddenly seemed to have recovered its energy and spirit. It suddenly let out a low growl, and the fur on its neck stood up. Its eyes were fierce, and it stared at the large number of barbarians in front of it. It bared its fangs without fear, and looked as if it wanted to bite a few of them to death to see if the barbarians' flesh tasted good. Lu Chen did not seem to notice the fierce behavior of the black wolf beside him. He continued to look at the crowd in front of him with a calm face, and even a hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. There seemed to be a deeper sense of mockery and contempt hidden in the depths of that smile. A man and a wolf, and a large group of silent but murderous barbarians, confronted each other in a somewhat strange way. After a while, suddenly Hui Yen, who was standing at the front of the crowd, laughed out loud. He strode forward, and then opened his arms, and gave Lu Chen a warm hug. "Brother, I've come to see you off," he said while laughing. The tense atmosphere in the crowd of barbarians suddenly eased. Many people could not help but let out a sigh of relief. There were also many people who loosened their grip on the hilt of their swords. Lu Chen smiled at him and said, "Thank you." Hui Yen pulled his arm and walked out of the camp side by side. Along the way, they talked cheerfully and wittily. Behind them, a large group of people followed silently. Just like that, they walked to the main gate of the tribe's camp. Hui Yen was still holding onto Lu Chen's hand and said with a smile, "Brother, are you really not going to consider staying and assisting me? To be honest, as long as you are here, no matter how vast the wilderness is, no matter how strong the enemy is, I will not have the slightest fear." Lu Chen said, "Patriarch, you're a man of great ambition and vision. You don't need my meager strength to accomplish great things. I still have some concerns in the north, so I have no choice but to return. Please forgive me, tribe leader." Hui Yen stared at him, and his expression was slightly complicated and heavy. He said, "That road is exceptionally dangerous. Even if you have a slim chance of survival, will it be all right?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "I still want to go and try." Hui Yen sighed, nodded and said, "I also know that you have made up your mind. I just want to persuade you to stay for one last time. But since things have come to this, then forget it. I can only wish you a safe journey." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Thank you." Hui Yen let go of his arm and looked deeply at Lu Chen. After waiting for a moment, seeing that Lu Chen still did not move, he could not help but frown, and could only open his mouth and say, do you still have something here?" Lu Chen seemed to come to a realization and nodded, "Ah, I do have something to say to you, but these words are not convenient for others to hear. How about this, tribe leader? You send me off alone. How about it?" Hui Yen was startled and said with some hesitation, "Why, can't you say it here?" Lu Chen said, "We're brothers, so there are some things we should talk about in private." Hui Yan's eyebrows twitched, and a strange expression flashed across his face. After a moment of silence, he said, "We have known each other for so long, but this is the first time you have said the word, brother." Lu Chen's expression was calm, and he said, "Anyway, we are leaving soon, there is no harm in saying it." Hui Yen laughed, nodded and said, "All right, since you have said this word, I will also send you off. Let's go." After saying this, he and Lu Chen walked forward side by side. Many of the barbarians beside them heard their words, and their expressions changed for a moment. Tai Xiong, He Niu, and the others couldn't help but speak out to persuade them. On the other side, the four priests, including Yi, had complicated expressions, and looked on without saying a word. Hui Yen turned around, and with an indifferent expression he waved his hand and said, "Lu Chen and I have a deep friendship, and it is not something you can understand. All of you stay here, and you are not allowed to follow." Everyone was speechless, and they looked at each other. In the end, they had no choice but to obey and stand on the spot, and watch the two people walk into the depths of the wasteland. "Those subordinates of yours seem to be very worried?" When they were a distance away from the tribe, and the figures of the people behind them had become blurry, Lu Chen suddenly opened his mouth and said to Hui Yen. Hui Yan's expression didn't change, and he casually replied with a smile, "That is not strange. You, the black-robed priest, have always been fierce and impressive, and everyone is afraid of you." Lu Chen smiled and couldn't help but ask, "You are also afraid of me?" Hui Yen shook his head and said, "I am not afraid." Lu Chen was a little curious, and after looking at him, he playfully said, Why is that? Are you not afraid that I will take advantage of the fact that you are alone and kill you?" Hui Yen lightly said, "You have witchcraft, and you are not controlled by the fire god's staff, so of course you have the ability to kill me. But I think, no matter what, you won't kill me." "Why do you say that?" Lu Chen asked. Hui Yen stopped walking and looked into the distance. He saw that the wasteland was vast and desolate, and the cold wind swept across the land. It was a bleak scene. In your heart, you originally wanted me to be that killing knife, and in the future, we, the barbarians, will fight and kill each other, isn't that right? The smile on Lu Chen's face slowly faded. He quietly stared at the barbarian in front of him, and the depths of his pupils seemed to shrink slightly. After a while, he nodded and said, "You are indeed much smarter than those barbarians." Hui Yen smiled, but his expression still looked a little bleak. He lightly said, "What's the use of being smart? I know your intentions, but I still have to walk this path. You can choose not to leave." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, "Even though this is not what I wanted, but since you have been honest with me today, I can also say that you can also protect your current foundation and not go south. Then, the Black Fire tribe can also maintain this situation for at least a few decades." Hui Yen coldly laughed, but spat and proudly said, "I killed my father, abandoned my son, and abandoned everything, not for this small situation. In the future, no matter how difficult and dangerous it is, or how much blood will flow, I will definitely restore the glory of the ancestors of the Black Fire tribe. Isn't it just dead people? The more dead, the better." He looked up to the sky and laughed. His expression was heroic, wild, and untamed. Lu Chen looked at him from the side, then slowly nodded and lightly smiled. Chapter 359. Give it to me. Hui Yen stretched out his large hand until it reached in front of Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked left and right and saw that this place was indeed very far from the Black Fire tribe. Apart from the two of them, there was no one else around. He nodded and said, "Give me the Fire God's staff." Hui Yen pulled out the Fire God's staff from a bag on his substitute body. Lu Chen looked at it and asked, "Have you been carrying it with you these days?" Hui Yen lightly said, "This divine weapon is so important. How can I let it leave my hands? In the future, I will have to rely on it for my grand plans and even control of the tribe." He caressed the staff a few times and handed it over to Lu Chen. In that instant, he seemed to sigh and bitterly smiled. "But I also did not think that the only person in this world that I can hand over this staff without worry would be you, a human." Lu Chen gently took it and said, "If you are like this, you will be very sad in the future. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to find someone that you can completely trust." Hui Yen coldly laughed and proudly said, "As long as I have the God's staff, I don't need anyone else." Lu Chen looked deeply at him and nodded. "Good. I hope that in a few decades, you will still be able to say this." As he spoke, he held one end of the Fire God's staff and placed the other end next to Hui Yan's large head. Then, he began to chant a strange incantation in a low voice. As his voice echoed, the runes on the Fire God's staff lit up one by one. A strange black flame gently burned. At the same time, Hui Yen suddenly frowned, as if he felt something. Then, he concentrated and listened, as if he was trying to memorize it. After a while, Lu Chen listened and said to Hui Yen, "Have you memorized it?" The flame closed its eyes and was silent for a while. Then, it opened its eyes and nodded. Lu Chen waved his hand and the light shadow on the Fire God's staff disappeared. Everything returned to its original state. He then returned the divine weapon to Hui Yen and said, "Remember this in your heart. This technique can only borrow the power of the Fire God's staff to control the hundreds of black fire guards that I have created with the runes, but it cannot create new people. In other words, if you want more black fire guards in the future, you can only rely on your priests to inscribe runes and control the priests to control more black fire guards. Even if this group of people is the most reliable and powerful force you have right now, it can be considered a gift from me before I leave." "Gift?" Hui Yen muttered. "When we left the tribe's camp, I saw the expressions of the black fire guards. Many of them seemed to want to rush over and kill you." Lu Chen smiled and said, "They only dare to think about it. If one of them really rushed out, I'll take it that he has the guts." Hui Yen looked at him and frowned. "Although you have given these people to me, but hearing you humiliate the warriors of the brute tribe, I still feel unhappy." Lu Chen smiled and shook his head. First, I will leave soon. I don't know if I will live or die. Why should I care about what you brute tribe think? Second, those people who are cowardly but have no choice but to listen to orders and fight to the death, isn't that what you want? Isn't this kind of black fire guards more useful? After he finished speaking, he laughed and patted Hui Yan's shoulder. Don't you think so? Hui Yan was silent for a long time. In the end, he laughed bitterly and said, "Scram." Walking into the depths of the wasteland, there was no one in front or behind them, only the wind blowing. Then they also stopped. Lu Chen turned around and said, "Let's go." Hui Yan nodded, but suddenly opened his mouth to stop him, saying, "Wait a moment." Lu Chen stopped and said, "What? Is there something else?" Hui Yan thought for a while and said, "Will we have the chance to meet again in the future?" Lu Chen thought for a while, then shook his head and said, "It should be impossible. This time, when I return north, if the path in the Great Snow Mountain is really as dangerous as you said, if my luck is not good, I'm afraid I won't be able to walk out and will die there. But if my luck is good, I think I won't come back." He turned his head to look at the surrounding scenery of the wasteland and said, "I don't like this place." Hui Yan sighed and said, "What a pity, I really want you to stay, and sometimes I also think, after you leave, I probably won't have anyone to talk to so frankly in my life." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. He looked at him and said, "What? It sounds like you really want to have a friend to talk to?" Hui Yan was silent for a moment before he burst into laughter. He waved his hand and said, "It's just a joke. In this wasteland, we barbarians only believe in strength. No friend can compare to this." As he spoke, he grabbed the fire god's staff and waved it in front of Lu Chen. Then he said proudly, "Just you wait. In the future, when I succeed, I will definitely think of a way to go north to visit your human territory. At that time, if we are fated to meet again, we will drink to our heart's content. Perhaps at that time, for your sake, I will be a bit merciful and kill a few of your people." North? Lu Chen smiled, then nodded and said, "That's ambitious. Good, I will wait for you. But your merciful heart, have you heard of the Bodhisattva of the Divine Central Plains?" Bodhisattva? What is that? Just a legendary merciful immortal. But forget it, you don't need to know. After all. Lu Chen turned around and strode forward. At the same time he said, "After all, in your heart, there is no longer a god. Live a few more years." Hui Yan said with a laugh, "You too." There would always be parting in life, just like a banquet that would eventually end. But this trip to the southern border was like a fleeting dream, making it impossible for one to love it. Lu Chen and Atu walked away with big strides. Occasionally, they would turn their heads to look back, and they would see that the tall and sturdy barbarian was still standing in the wilderness. However, his figure was gradually becoming blurry. What would everyone be like in a few decades? How different would everyone's fate be? Or perhaps, these two people who were at opposite ends of the world, who should have been separated by a great distance and never intersected, might not even be able to live to that time. Who knew? Lu Chen suddenly called out as he looked at the desolate scenery in front of him. Atsu raised its head and looked at him. Actually, it turned its head. This big black wolf had stayed in this wasteland for a year or two, and its body seemed to have grown even bigger. Just by standing, it seemed to be taller than Lu Chen. "Why don't you stay here?" Lu Chen said. Atsu's footsteps suddenly stopped. It looked stunned for a moment, and then it let out a low growl. It seemed to be very angry at Lu Chen's words, and it even bared its fangs. Lu Chen smiled and glanced at the scenery around him. He then said indifferently, "The method I used to save you in the past was actually a method that the devil cult had obtained from the barbarian tribes in the chaotic lands. If I remember correctly, based on your bloodline, you should belong to the holy beast that the barbarian tribe revered." He pointed to the south. The wasteland there was wider and more distant. The vast wind blew past, and the world was a vast expanse. Over there, in the south of the wasteland, is the place where the barbarian tribe lives. There are countless powerful and prosperous tribes living there, and it is far better than this barren north. There should be your kind there, and they are also the holy beasts that were born in this land. Do you want to go find them? After saying that, He stared at Atsu to see its reaction. He saw Atsu look to the south, and then it turned its head. It seemed to grumble at Lu Qin, and then it turned around and walked in the opposite direction. Lu Qin laughed and chased after it, patted its head, and said with a smile, "Okay, then let's go together." With that, he exerted a little force in his hand, and his body rose into the air. He flipped over and sat on Atsu's back, and then said with a laugh, "Come on, let's go home." The giant black wolf looked up to the sky and howled. Its voice shook the wilderness, and then it rushed out like a black lightning, galloping across the vast and boundless wasteland. It ran faster and faster, and the more it ran, the more anxious it became, as if the earth was responding to it, as if its ancient bloodline had suddenly awakened on this day, and its blood was boiling. It galloped against the wind, rushing to the more distant mountains in the north, and behind the snow-covered peaks, to the hometown in its memory. Chapter 360. The Great Snowy Mountain was the tallest and largest mountain range in the vast land of chaos, spanning millions of miles. It was also one of the most difficult and dangerous places to cross since ancient times. This huge mountain range was windy and snowy all year round, and the weather was harsh. At the same time, there were many ferocious and powerful demonic beasts. For many years, no one had been able to pass through this barrier between the southern wilderness and the northern wilderness. However, in the hearts of the people from both the north and the south, this great snow mountain had a completely different meaning. The human race in the north regarded it as the most dangerous place in the world. They regarded it as the most dangerous place in the world. But, apart from that, they didn't have any other associations. But, among the barbarian tribes in the southern wilderness, they generally regarded this towering mountain range as a holy and lofty divine mountain. Many barbarians even believed that the god they believed in might live on the top of the Great Snow Mountain. Lu Qin only learned of this difference after he came to the southern wilderness. After all, the northern and southern tribes had been separated by the land of chaos for thousands of years. Even if there were some surviving barbarian tribes in the land of chaos, it was basically impossible for them to have any contact with the human race. When they met, they would fight to the death. How could they have the leisure to exchange cultural views? And the road that Hui Yen told Lu Qin about to return to the north happened to be in this Great Snowy Mountain. The Great Snowy Mountain was windy and snowy all year round, and the weather was extremely harsh. Especially in the depths of the mountain range, the temperature plummeted. Not to mention that ordinary people could not survive here. Even cultivators with cultivation would find it very difficult to survive here. Not to mention that the Great Snowy Mountain was filled with tyrannical demonic beasts whose strength far exceeded that of the outside world. According to the legends of the human race, any demonic beast that had grown up in the Great Snowy Mountain was almost as strong as a human Yuanying stage enlightened master. Moreover, it was said that in the deepest parts of the Great Snowy Mountain, there were a few ancient species that had been left behind from ancient times. They had long been extinct in the outside world, and only survived in the Great Snowy Mountain. Such a king of demonic beasts was extremely powerful. It was said that they were not weaker than a human deity stage enlightened master, or even stronger. It was precisely because such terrifying demon beasts resided here that no one dared to explore the depths of the demon beasts since ancient times until now. There were always a few brave people who were brave enough to venture into the demon beasts, but none of them returned. It was reasonable to say that it was impossible to pass through such a dangerous place. However, the secret that Hui Yen revealed to Lu Qin that day gave him a glimmer of hope. First of all, there were 3 days in a year where the wind and snow would stop. Second, that valley was obviously connected to the north and south. Otherwise, there was no way to explain what Hui Yen had said about seeing a demonic beast holding a human corpse in its mouth. Lu Qin had thought about this trip for a long time, but in the end he still decided to take a gamble. Even though there were people and there were people, Lu Qin of people, the snowy of Snowy Mountain, they were mountain. As for the way back, Lu Qin didn't really have much of a choice, even though the snowy mountains were extremely dangerous. When he fell into the Longchuan, he encountered an extremely terrifying beast and was forced to hide in the mysterious seed. Then, he was washed away by the Longchuan River to the southern wilderness. However, if he wanted to go back, this path was obviously not possible, because the river flowed all the way into the Chaos Abyss, an even more terrifying place. Lu Chen did not think that he had the ability to survive in that terrifying place. Going upstream was also not reliable. He had gone to check and found that the upper reaches of the Longchuan River were extremely wide. He could not even see the edge of the other side. It was not like a river, but more like a vast ocean. If he wanted to go there, he had to cross the Longchuan River. However, he had already experienced the dangers of the river once. No matter what, whether it was him or Atsu, he did not want to fall into the river a second time. At least when he was walking on land, he could still have some reaction and think of a way. He was not completely helpless in the water. In the end, he could only hide in the seed and face the situation where he knew nothing about the outside world and came out with the idea of leaving his life to fate. And to be honest, don't you think it's strange? Lu Chen used his hands to block the wind and snow in front of him. He lowered his body even more, almost sticking to the back of He Langat's. At the same time, he muttered. At this moment, his whole body was lying on the back of Atsu. Compared to a human like him, He Lang Atsu was much more adapted to the environment of the Great Snowy Mountain. Climbing mountains and wading rivers, braving the wind and snow, no matter how rugged the mountain road was, Atsu walked almost like it was walking on flat ground. It was unusually easy. This made Lu Chen, who was originally very worried, overjoyed. He could not help but sigh that raising such a lazy dog for so many years was really not a waste. As the saying goes, raising a dog for many years is to use it for a moment. However, as they gradually went deeper into the Great Snowy Mountain, the wind and snow became stronger, and the mountain road became more rugged and dangerous. Even though Atsu was a monster that had already advanced, it gradually began to become a little difficult to walk. But in general, they were still much more relaxed than ordinary people. At least according to the instructions given by Hui Yen before they separated, this place was not too far from the secret canyon that he mentioned. Struggling to move forward in the howling and whistling wind and snow, Atsu's black fur seemed to have almost been dyed white. Even the huge dog's head had a lot of snow on it. Its two ears moved a little, and it turned back to look at Lu Chen. There was some unfriendly emotion in its eyes, probably contempt. Lu Chen did not care about it, and only said to himself, "Look, the Great Snowy Mountain is windy and snowy, and it is bitterly cold all year round. It is obviously the most difficult place to live, but why are there so many powerful monsters gathered here?" Atsu's footsteps paused slightly, and then it once again barked unhappily as if to say, "This dog is in a hurry, I don't have time to think so much." Lu Chen, on the other hand, raised his head and looked through the wind and snow at the majestic mountain in the distance. He could not even see the peak of the mountain, and said to himself, "There must be something strange about this place." Ever since they entered the Great Snowy Mountain, they had, of course, encountered many monsters along the way, but they, a man and a dog, managed to deal with them one by one. Atsu itself was a powerful monster, and when monsters that were weaker than it approached, most of them would be scared away. There were a few monsters that were not weaker than it, and some were even stronger than it, but either Lu Chen would help them, or they would use all kinds of strange methods to defeat those monsters, or if even he could not deal with them, they would simply run away. In short, their experience along the way was that monsters that were weaker than them naturally could not defeat them, and monsters that were stronger than them could not outrun Atsu. Therefore, they stumbled along the way, but unexpectedly, they entered the depths of the Great Snowy Mountain safely. However, although everything seemed to be going very smoothly, Lu Chen was still a little worried in his heart. That was, they should not have encountered the most powerful and terrifying monsters in the legends. No one knew where the prehistoric monsters, which were said to be as powerful as deity transformation stage perfected monarchs, were hiding in the Great Snowy Mountain. Of course, if they could avoid meeting such terrifying monsters, of course, it would be better not to. At least for now, it seemed that Lu Chen and Atsu were quite lucky. In the evening of this day, they finally found the canyon hidden in the depths of the Great Snowy Mountain. No one knew how long it had been since anyone came here. The open space on the periphery of the canyon was already piled up with almost waist-high snow, which made it particularly difficult for Atsu and Lu Qin to walk. However, compared to what they saw when they stuck their heads out to look into the canyon, it was as beautiful as heaven. It was a bottomless valley. Perhaps there was a strange change in the earth veins many years ago, which created such a strange place in the depths of the Great Snowy Mountain. Below the canyon was a huge bottomless crack. It was pitch black and no one knew where it led to. Only the whistling and swirling wind and snow covered most of the huge crack in the ground. On both sides of the canyon were precipices that were tens of thousands of feet high, and it was difficult for apes and monkeys to climb. Only on one side of the precipice, as if it was the work of the gods, there was a natural precipice that was less than 2 feet wide, and some of the narrowest parts were less than 1 foot wide. The wind and snow were whistling, and behind the wind and snow, there seemed to be endless darkness. Lu Qin and Atsu stood there for a long time without saying anything. After a while, Lu Qin let out a long sigh and said, "Let's take a rest and wait for the wind and snow to stop." Chapter 361. The snowstorm in the Great Snowy Mountain was extremely strong, and it was difficult for ordinary people to stand. But in the canyon, perhaps because of the terrain, the strong wind blew down, carrying with it countless snowstorms, violently bombarding the hard stone walls on both sides. The power of the snowstorm was at least several times stronger than outside the canyon. Under such circumstances, walking on the less than 2 feet wide path was not much different from courting death. Lu Qin quickly confirmed this fact, and judged that with his and Atsu's abilities, it was indeed impossible to resist the thousands of years of natural defense in this huge mountain. He then made a very logical judgment, and decided to wait for the only 3 sunny days of the year. As for which 3 days the snowstorm would stop, Huoyan actually did not say clearly that day, but according to him, it should be around this season, at most no more than half a month. But even so, there was still a very difficult matter at hand, and that was, even if they were outside the canyon, the environment in the Great Snowy Mountain was still unbearable. The weather was freezing, the wind and snow filled the sky. Even if Lu Qin had cultivation, it was impossible to wait here day and night. However, he had a simple and convenient way to deal with this extremely difficult and dangerous problem that most people might not be able to solve. Hide in the mysterious tree hole. He braved the wind and snow, bringing Atsu around the secret canyon, and finally found a leeward cliff. The wind and snow here were much weaker, exposing a piece of hard rock. Lu Qin carefully examined the surroundings, and after confirming that there were no traces of people or monsters nearby, he brought Atsu to hide here, and then directly escaped into the mysterious tree hole. Compared to the time when he fled from the Kunlun Mountain to the disorienting land in a hurry, this time on his return to the north, Lu Qin had plenty of time to prepare. Therefore, in order to avoid a predicament like last time at the bottom of the Longchuan River, or in order to at least last longer in that situation, Lu Qin stuffed more food and water into the tree hole this time. In addition, he even made a crude hourglass in his spare time in the Black Fire tribe, in order to prevent being unaware of the passage of time in the outside world when he was trapped in the tree hole. Compared to the bitter cold weather of the Great Snowy Mountain outside, hiding in the tree hole was of course much more comfortable, but at the same time, it was very boring. The place was only so big, there was nowhere to walk, and there was nothing to see. After a long time, it was indeed a little stuffy, but fortunately, both Lu Qin and Atsu had experienced such days before, so it was tolerable. About every 3 to 4 hours, Lu Qin would come out of the tree hole to check on the situation. Firstly, to see if the snowstorm had stopped, and secondly, to check if there were any unusual movements around the seeds. However, this canyon seemed to be a very remote place. Not to mention that there were no signs of humans, even the beasts didn't like to come here. They just stayed here like this, and nothing unexpected happened. They had been safe and sound all this time. The snowstorm stopped on the 7th day after Lu Qin arrived at the valley. On that day, when Lu Qin and Atsu came out of the tree hole, they saw that the original white in front of them had suddenly disappeared. The mountains were quiet, and the sky was clear, blue, and as clean as a sparkling blue crystal. Only, at the edge of the mountain peaks further away, they could still see the white snowstorm swirling. From the looks of it, it seemed that the sudden clearing up and the stopping of the snowstorm only existed in the inner part of the Great Snow Mountain. In the outer area, the wind and snow were still blowing. Even though Lu Chen was experienced and knowledgeable, it was the first time he had seen such a strange scene. He could not help but look at it a few more times, thinking that there were indeed many strange things in the Great Snow Mountain. In fact, along the way, he had also noticed many things. For example, the most dangerous and ferocious demonic beasts in this mountain. Although most of them were extremely dangerous and violent, and the mere sight of them was terrifying, Lu Chen and Atu had discovered that the demonic beasts in this mountain seemed to have an invisible boundary. No matter how ferocious or how angry they were, once Lu Chen and Atu left their boundary, these demonic beasts would immediately stop, and no matter what, they would not take even half a step past their boundary. Along the way, based on this discovery, Lu Chen and Atsu fled in panic and avoided many fatal disasters. But what was the reason for this? Lu Chen still could not figure out. Just like what he could not understand, the environment of the Great Snowy Mountain was so harsh. Why were there so many powerful demon beasts that were reluctant to leave? Was it not better to go down the mountain to live in the southern wilderness? These things were probably hard to understand. Lu Chen thought about the strange things he had seen in the past few days. Then, he packed up his things and walked with Atu to the entrance of the canyon. He looked inside. After the wind and snow stopped, the flying snow in the valley also disappeared, including the strong wind that was howling nonstop. The entire nameless valley looked dead silent, and with the dark bottomless crack below, it gave off a very gloomy feeling. Lu Chen frowned and looked around the canyon for a while. He then patted Atu's head and said, "What do you think? We're going in now. If you're going to regret it, this is your last chance." Atsu glanced at him, but did not respond. Lu Chen laughed heartily and strode forward, walking into the canyon. The valley was very narrow, and for safety's sake, they had to stick their whole body to the cliff, and in front of them was a bottomless abyss. This kind of feeling really made people nervous and afraid. If an ordinary person was in such a situation, they would not be able to bear the pressure after walking for a long time. Their hands and feet would tremble, and in the end, they would lose control of their body and fall into the abyss. However, of course, Lu Chen was not an ordinary person. Even compared to ordinary cultivators, his mind was much calmer and more tenacious, probably because he had seen too many life and death situations. He just stuck his back to the cliff, and then began to move forward step by step. During this process, his face was calm and indifferent, as if there was no expression, including when his eyes swept across the dark abyss in front of him. There seemed to be no fluctuations, as if it was no different from walking on the flat ground. Just like that, he walked slowly, and soon he had walked more than 10 feet. However, when he occasionally turned his head back, he was startled. He saw that Atu was still standing in the same place, and did not walk with him on this narrow path. Lu Chen stopped and shouted behind him, "What's wrong? Are you afraid?" Atsu glanced at the bottomless abyss at the bottom of the valley, and still did not seem to have any reaction. Lu Chen thought for a moment, and walked back with his back to the cliff, jumped back to Atsu's side and said, "There are two ways. One is, I will take you, and the other is, you can hide in the tree hole, and I will take you there." Atsu's head tilted, and seemed to look at Lu Chen with some doubt and confusion. Lu Chen smiled, reached out to touch Atsu's head, and said, "It's okay, this kind of terrain is really too dangerous, and too difficult to walk, let alone you, even I have to." Before he finished speaking, Atsu suddenly raised a front foot, pushed Lu Chen's hand away, and then barked at him, looking a little disdainful. Lu Chen retracted his hand in shock. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the big black dog suddenly leap up, and then jump onto the precipice path. It didn't even look at the narrowness of the path, and actually ran forward as if it was flying easily and effortlessly. It didn't fear the dangers around it at all, and it walked extremely steadily as if it was running on flat ground. It didn't seem to be any slower than running on the mountains outside, and in the blink of an eye, it had run far away. After a while, Atsu stopped in the distance, turned around, and barked proudly at Lu Chen, who was still standing on the edge of the cliff, a little stunned. "Damn it!" Lu Chen, who had always been calm, suddenly cursed and said angrily, "Stupid dog, so you think I walk too slowly?" Chapter 362. Sometimes, Lu Chen felt that the black dog he had raised was not a dog, but another kind of animal. He had never seen a dog that could jump up and down such a dangerous cliff as if it was walking on flat ground. Even if the path was extremely narrow, even if the precipice was very dangerous, and there were hard stone protrusions from time to time, Atsu did not seem to care about all these hardships. On the contrary, it seemed to be enjoying itself as it walked freely. There were many places that seemed dangerous, where one wrong step could cause one to fall into a bottomless abyss, but the black dog did not even look at them as it leaped over them. Sometimes, it would even grab onto a hard rock and swing over, causing people to be extremely frightened. The dangerous moments made them want to break out in cold sweat for it. However, this big black dog did not seem to care at all. Instead, it would turn its head from time to time to look at Lu Chen, who was steadily moving forward step by step, sticking close to the precipice. It would bark a few times, and then it simply stopped and waited. There was a hint of disdain in its pair of big dog eyes. Lu Chen walked over slowly, glared at the dog, and said, "What are you looking at? Have you never seen a human walking before?" Atsu grinned, stood up, wagged its tail, and continued to walk forward. However, its movements were much lighter than Lu Chen's, and it ran a long distance in 2 or 3 steps. Looking at the huge black dog walking on the narrow precipice path, it seemed particularly uncoordinated. It seemed that it would fall at any time, but the dog was so steady that it was appalling. In the end, Lu Chen could only shake his head and sigh. He muttered, "Is this a dog or a monkey?" Of course, Atsu was still a dog, although the dog had changed a lot. Lu Chen recalled the time when he was still in Kunlun Mountain a few years ago. It seemed that during that period of time, Atsu was let loose by him at will. It ran around the vast forest and wilderness of Kunlun Mountain all day long. Could it be that the ability to climb mountains and cross rivers was trained at that time? However, there were many wild dogs in this world, and there were many that lived in the wild all day long. But apart from the one in front of him, it seemed that it was difficult to find another big dog that could have this kind of ability. Therefore, it seemed that the only explanation was that Atsu had advanced to become a holy beast. However, although he complained, Lu Chen obviously would not be angry because of this. In fact, the sudden display of Atsu's ability made Lu Chen a lot less worried. At least he did not have to consider leaving Atsu alone in the tree hole. Perhaps it was because the tree hole was too lonely, and too depressing. It was fine if Lu Chen was there, but if Lu Chen left for the outside world for a while, when he came back, Atsu would become extremely manic. He did not know if it was because of fear of Atsu. So, Lu Chen tried to avoid leaving Atsu alone in the tree hole. This canyon was not a straight line that led to the end. Instead, it was more like a twisting long snake swimming in this mysterious great snow mountain, meandering forward. As Lu Chen and Atsu gradually went deeper, they gradually saw a scene that had not been seen by the outside world for many years. The canyon was sometimes narrow and sometimes wide, and the cliffs on both sides were constantly changing according to the mountain. At the narrowest part, the cliffs on both sides seemed to almost stick together, so much so that Lu Chen could even touch the stone wall on the opposite side if he stretched out his hand. But after walking for a while, the cliffs on both sides suddenly opened up, and the cliffs on both sides were suddenly separated by hundreds of feet. It was so far that it seemed that he could not even see the opposite side clearly. There was no snow in the sky, but there were no birds flying over the canyon either. After the never-ending snowstorm temporarily stopped, there was no other sound here. Everything was a little scary, and only the sunlight falling from the sky in the distance shone into half of the canyon, adding a trace of vitality and warmth to the place. Many of the demonic beasts in the Great Snow Mountain seemed to be very disgusted with this canyon, so even after walking for a long time, Lu Chen did not see any demonic beasts here. This made him a little puzzled, because according to what Hui Yen said that day, a giant wolf demonic beast had appeared here. He quietly walked alone in this actually incomparably dangerous canyon. Other than Atsu, there were no other living creatures. After walking for a long time in this kind of place, it was easy to have a feeling of being forgotten by the whole world. But just like this, Lu Chen walked in silence for a day. When the sky was getting dark, Lu Chen finally found a slightly more spacious place on this dangerous cliff path. In fact, it was only a small platform 3 to 4 feet wide, and the stone surface was slightly protruding, but it could be considered as a rare place to rest on this road. Lu Chen looked ahead, only to see that as far as his eyes could see, the cliff path was still winding forward, and he could not see the end at all. After a few twists and turns, it turned into a place where he could not see clearly. Similarly, the mysterious canyon that he was in at the moment, even though he had walked in it for a whole day, was still winding forward, as if there was no end. Lu Chen whistled to the front. Atsu heard it, turned back to look, and then walked back along the stone wall. Lu Chen patted its head and said, "It's getting dark, let's rest here for the night." The cliff path in the canyon was a natural barrier. Walking in the day was an extremely dangerous thing, not to mention at night it was pitch black. It was really possible to fall into the abyss with one wrong step at any time. Even a bold person like Lu Chen did not dare to take this risk. Atsu lay down next to him. This small stone platform was not very big, and with the two of them here, it suddenly felt a little crowded. Lu Chen simply sat with his back against the stone wall and let Atsu lie on his thighs. This way, not only did it save space, but being covered by Atsu was also like having a warm and thick quilt on his body. It was very warm. After the sky turned dark, Lu Chen hugged Atsu, and for a moment, he also felt a little warm in his heart. He smiled slightly and then closed his eyes. Compared to the quiet Lu Chen, Atsu was a little bit restless. Its huge head kept twisting left and right, but fortunately, it probably knew that this place was not a place where it could do whatever it wanted, so most of the time it was quite obedient. Just like this, one person and one dog stayed quietly in this canyon until the last bit of light in the sky disappeared above the canyon. Darkness suddenly came, like a tide, instantly drowning everything. There was still no wind or snow at night, but it began to gradually become colder. There wasn't a single ray of light left, right, front, and back. There was a feeling of loneliness and desolation. The darkness even gave people the illusion that the abyss was right beside them, within reach, and they would fall into it with just a slight flip. There was nothing above and below them, and they were alone on the precipice. It was as if they were the only people left in the whole world at this moment. Atsu's body suddenly moved in the darkness, then it turned its head and looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen's hands were still on Atsu, and in the darkness, he saw Atsu's eyes. That pair of eyes with a bit of faint green, there seemed to be a flickering flame in the pupils, but also like a strange mirror, reflecting a vague shadow. Lu Chen stared at this pair of strange eyes, staring at the reflection in the depths of the eyes, watching it twisting with the flame, and remained silent. After a while, suddenly, the green light in Atsu's eyes suddenly brightened, as if it suddenly wanted to jump. Lu Chen was taken aback, and he quickly used his hands to pull Atsu's body. On this stone platform, which was not very big, there was no room for too much movement. After being pulled by him, Atsu seemed to think of the current situation, and its body quieted down. However, its emotions did not calm down along with its forcefully suppressed body. On the contrary, it seemed to become more and more agitated. It began to let out a deep roar, and its sharp teeth began to grind, making a clattering sound as if two sharp blades were clashing against each other. Lu Chen hugged its body tightly, and the pupil in his eyes slightly contracted. He gently pressed Atsu's head against his chest. Atsu seemed to understand what he meant and finally calmed down a little, but Lu Chen could still feel that this black wolf's body seemed to be trembling slightly. "What's wrong?" He lowered his voice and asked softly. Atsu turned his head and called out in a low voice to the people below. Lu Chen took a deep look at it, took a deep breath, and said in a low voice, "Is there something down there?" Atsu did not have any reaction, nor did it make any sound, but from the feeling that came from his arm, it seemed that this big dog's heartbeat and blood flow were all very fast. Lu Chen let out a soft breath, nodded to Atsu, and then tilted his body, slowly began to tilt his body. Bit by bit, without any sound, he stretched his head to the side, and looked at the bottom of the stone platform, at the dark and bottomless black crack. Under the stone platform, it was as dark as the sea. But at this moment, there were already waves. The darkness was like a tide, wave after wave, surging and slapping, as if there was something strange twisting, circling, and struggling under the darkness. It roared silently in the darkness, and bit by bit, it surged upwards. Chapter 363. The night was too dark and dense. It was impossible to clearly see what was in the darkness below. However, the aura coming from the space below him was abnormally majestic and powerful, causing Lu Chen to involuntarily have the illusion that he was as small as an ant. At that moment, countless thoughts flashed through Lu Chen's mind, and he also thought of the most important reason that made the Great Snow Mountain a forbidden place in the human world. In addition to the harsh and cold wind and snow in the mountain, there were also those unimaginably powerful and mysterious monsters. According to the legends, the most powerful demon beasts were primordial mutants that hid in the hidden corners of the Great Snow Mountain. They were extremely powerful, and they were not inferior to the perfected monarchs of the Soul Formation realm, and might even be stronger. Lu Chen didn't know if there was such a terrifying monster in the canyon under him at the moment, but in terms of feeling he felt that it was very likely, because he had never seen such a terrifying aura and huge momentum in his life. At this moment, it seemed that the whole canyon was trembling, and Lu Chen clearly felt that the stone wall behind him was also trembling nonstop. For a moment, he almost subconsciously wanted to run back to the mysterious tree hole in the seed with Atsu in his arms, but when this thought flashed through his mind, he quickly suppressed it. This place was too dangerous. The small stone platform they were on looked so fragile and narrow. Lu Chen had no confidence in what would happen to the lone seed after they hid in the tree hole to take refuge. Perhaps the terrifying monster that was about to come out would not care about this tiny thing, but in the chaos, there was a great possibility that this seed would fall into the bottomless abyss underground. At that time, perhaps it would be the truly terrifying place. Lu Chen also didn't want to find out what kind of strange things were in the depths of the dark underground. Therefore, at that critical moment, he suppressed all his fear and impulsiveness in the end, and with unimaginable determination, he hugged Atsu tightly against the cold stone wall, widened his eyes, and looked at the dark world in front of him. The darkness was rolling like a tide, and a terrible roar came from afar, making people tremble. The mountains began to tremble, and then, a rumbling sound like thunder came from the depths of the earth, as if something was climbing up step by step from the depths of the earth. Every step seemed to cross a large stone wall, making the darkness thicker and the black tide more turbulent. Atsu's body began to tremble, as if it was instinctively afraid. Lu Chen could even feel that its muscles were twisting and trembling, and its blood flow was speeding up. It even had a feeling that it was going to jump up and run for its life in the next moment. However, in such a dark night, which mysterious and terrifying monster was nearby, running away at this moment was almost equivalent to seeking death. So, Lu Chen suddenly grabbed Atsu's head and hugged it tightly in his arms. Then he lowered his body and covered Atsu's head with his chest. In the darkness, he looked like a father, using his body to block all the dangers for his child, blocking all the darkness outside. Atsu's body, which was about to go berserk, suddenly trembled. Perhaps it felt the warmth of Lu Chen's chest, or perhaps it heard the heartbeat of this man's chest, or perhaps it was comforted by the embrace. Atsu quieted down and no longer made any movements. It just silently nestled in Lu Chen's arms. The night was dark and cold, the black tide was dancing wildly, and the black shadows were going crazy. In the corner of the shadow, two tiny ant-like shadows were still holding on, silently enduring. When the darkness boiled to its limit and the mountain shook violently, an indescribable aura suddenly burst out of the ground. Lu Chen looked at it closely, but he couldn't see it clearly no matter how hard he tried. Everything was covered in darkness, but the darkness itself seemed to have merged into one, slowly rising from the crack in the ground not far away from him. It felt like if Lu Chen stretched out his hand, he might be able to touch the monster in the darkness. They were so close, as if there was only a thin line between life and death. Lu Chen held Atsu, gritted his teeth, and remained motionless. The terrifying monster in the darkness didn't seem to notice that there were two tiny creatures on the cliff of the canyon, or to it, those two things were not much different from real ants. The huge shadow was almost impossible to see in the night, and Lu Chen couldn't tell how big the monster was. Perhaps the darkness itself increased people's fear, making people imagine the monster to be even more terrifying. However, he could sense that the monster had left the crevice and was climbing upwards. Then, it left the canyon. When the boundless darkness surged to the top of the mysterious canyon, a terrifying howl came from the top of the mountain. The howl shook the surrounding wilderness and the mountains. Rocks of all sizes began to fall from the precipice. Lu Chen endured the pain of being smashed by the rocks as he tried his best to maintain his balance. Suddenly, he muttered a curse, but no one could hear what he was cursing. The unknown underground monster appeared in the night. Of course, it couldn't just stand on the top of the mountain and howl a few times. Soon, Lu Chen felt that the breath started to go away. At the same time, there was a burst of indescribable strange sounds in the mountains further away. It sounded like a fight, a howl, a shout, and a cry of despair. Is it looking for food? This was the first thought that came to Lu Chen's mind. But in this world of ice and snow, the only food that could be found were those equally powerful and fierce monsters. Lu Chen sucked in a breath of cold air and sat still in his original spot. The dark night seemed to be particularly desolate and long. He didn't know how long he had waited, but at a certain moment in the night, suddenly, the terrifying and powerful breath returned again. In an instant, the same scene of the earth shaking and the mountains boiling happened again. Atsu was a little excited again, but under Lu Chen's comfort, he held back. Then, Lu Chen watched the huge shadow slowly return to the bottomless abyss under the cliff in the darkness until everything calmed down. The night was cold, and he couldn't see his fingers in front of him. It was as if nothing had happened in the darkness. However, there was a different breath here and Lu Chen could feel it. It was the faint smell of blood that came with the wind. No one knew when Atsu fell asleep, lying on Lu Chen's lap and sleeping soundly. But Lu Chen didn't sleep. His eyes were always open, looking at the darkness in front of him, until dawn. When the sun rose, the first ray of light dispelled the darkness here, and Lu Chen saw the canyon again. It was quiet in the canyon, and it seemed to be exactly the same as yesterday. It was so quiet as if there were no living creatures here at all. Lu Chen sighed softly, then patted Atsu's head, and woke the big black dog up from its dream. Atsu woke up with sleepy eyes. He first looked left and right, then looked up at the sky. After staring blankly for a while, he suddenly let out a happy cry. He then jumped up and ran forward while wagging his tail. After running for a while, he even turned back and barked at Lu Chen, as if urging him to hurry up. Lu Chen also stood up with a smile, and let out a long sigh of relief. Then, after stretching his body, he continued to walk forward. They walked forward for about 100 feet. Suddenly, Atsu stopped. It didn't bark, nor did it walk. It just looked up at the high mountain cliff in front of it. Lu Chen walked behind it, and was slightly surprised. He also looked up, and then his body also trembled. On the towering precipice of the canyon, under the illumination of the rare sunlight, there were a few huge claw marks on the stone walls, like sharp blades directly cutting open the incomparably hard stone walls. And at a higher place, at the peak of the mountain, there was a large mass of shocking blood stains. Some places had dried up, but there was still more blood dripping down from the stone walls of the mountain, like a blood waterfall, so frighteningly displayed in front of their eyes. The smell of blood in the air suddenly became extremely strong. Chapter 364. Lu Chen and Atsu both stared at the blood stains on the mountain for a long time. Then, Lu Chen retracted his gaze, patted Atsu's head gently and said in a low voice, "Let's go." Atsu looked back at him, then continued to walk forward without saying a word. Although the canyon was already quiet, although both of them were still walking steadily, the atmosphere seemed to be faintly gloomier and more depressing than before. In contrast, Lu-chan seemed to be calmer, and his face was calm, while Atsu was not as cheerful as it was yesterday. They continued along the path of the precipice, and the ravine stretched on before them in all its twists and turns, and still seemed to have no end. The length of the canyon was somewhat beyond Lu-chan's expectation. After walking for a long time and still not seeing the exit, Lu-chan's face began to become a little gloomy. In the mysterious tree hole in the seed, he had stored enough food and water, which was enough to support him and Atsu for a long time, so he was not worried about food. But the most worrisome thing at the moment was another matter. It had been a day and a half since he first entered the canyon. In a year, there were only 3 sunny days in the Great Snow Mountain, which meant that in another half a day, the unusually violent snowstorm would flood this place again. Lu-chan still clearly remembered the scene of the snowstorm when he first came out of the canyon that day. It was too difficult and dangerous to walk through this cliff path in that kind of situation. However, what was more troublesome was that he had now walked so far, and it was almost impossible to go back. This was probably the so-called dilemma. Maybe Atsu did not think so much, but since just now, it had been looking back at Lu-chan from time to time, with a doubtful and worried look in its eyes. It probably wanted to see if Lu-chan had the intention to go back. Lu-chan understood what Atsu meant, but after a moment of thinking, he quickly made a decision. "Let's go, Atsu." He pointed to the front of the canyon. Atsu stared at him for a moment, and then, as if a huge stone had been lifted from his heart, he no longer hesitated and paced back and forth. Even the initial pressure seemed to have disappeared. He returned to his original relaxed self and began to run forward. After running for a while, it turned back and barked twice, as if it was complaining that Lu-chan was too slow. Lu-chan couldn't help but laugh. As they continued to walk forward, all kinds of strange scenery in this mysterious canyon gradually appeared in front of them. There were all kinds of strange peaks and rocks, steep cliffs, and precipices like swords and mirrors, decorated with white snow, which was also a rare wonder in the world. But as they went deeper into the canyon, Lu-chan soon saw that on the mountain walls on both sides of the canyon, there were more scratch marks that he had seen before. It looked like some kind of unknown giant beast had climbed here, and at every distance, he could vaguely see a little bit of dried blood stain. He glanced at the dark abyss that he couldn't see clearly, frowned, and then continued walking forward. The days slowly passed as they walked and stopped. They still couldn't see the exit of the canyon, but the huge claw marks constantly reminded them of the danger that was lurking everywhere. The sky gradually darkened again. Before the evening came, Lu-chan and Atsu finally found a place to rest. It was similar to the stone platform they stayed on last night. It was also a slightly wider platform, but it was better than yesterday. The stone wall here was probably peeled off over the years, forming a concave gap. It was about the width of a person, and could barely be regarded as a small cave. After seeing this place and seeing that it was getting late, even though it was not dusk yet, Lu-chan quickly decided to stop here to rest. Walking in this unknown place was inexplicably heavy pressure. Knowing nothing about the front, he could only take one step at a time. Although Lu-chan appeared to be very calm and collected most of the time, from yesterday until now, it was equivalent to him walking on this extremely dangerous precipice path for 2 whole days. His back was pressed against the stone wall, and beneath his feet was a bottomless abyss. His life was in danger at all times, and even when he was resting last night, there were still those mysterious and terrifying monsters appearing and disappearing. He also did not sleep for the whole night, and kept his eyes open until dawn. After being tense for such a long time, even if he had a strong will and cultivation, he still felt a deep sense of exhaustion. So, after choosing a place to rest, he called out to Atsu and curled up in the small cave. It was said to be half a small cave because the stone wall was only slightly concave. At most, his body could only lean on it, but most of his hands and feet were still outside. But even so, this kind of terrain still made Lu-chan feel a little relieved. Atsu ran over and looked at him curiously, then looked left and right, and finally looked at the stone wall on the opposite side. There was a huge claw mark, which was cut down from the mountain cliff. It was exposed in front of them, and it was about 100 feet away. Atsu looked for a while, and then shrunk its body. Just like yesterday, it once again lay down beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen smiled, hugged Atsu, and then one man and one dog silently watched the sky slowly darken. The sky darkened, night once again arrived. Sometimes, people would suddenly feel a kind of insignificance, indescribably aware of the fragility of life. Also, the world was so vast, the creation of heaven and earth was so mysterious. This kind of feeling would always follow people throughout their lives, always appearing in a lonely moment in the dead of night, or when you looked up at the boundless sky alone. Lu Chen was in the darkness, quietly looking at the dark sky. At that moment, he suddenly remembered many things from a long time ago. When he was young, he had once firmly believed in this belief, and he did not hesitate to risk his life for it. That belief was the only thing that allowed him to survive through the most difficult and dangerous days. Until today, he had never wavered much in that belief. But there were many, many things that were once engraved in his heart. He had once felt so much pain that he thought he would never forget them. But on this night, when he suddenly thought of them, he realized that he hadn't thought of them for a long time. Time was like a tide, always silently washing away his memories over and over again, diluting the pain and blurring the past. It turned out that emotions would eventually fade. Whether it was hatred or love, after a long time, would only an indifferent shadow be left. Lu Chen quietly looked up at the dark sky, staring at the figures of the past in his memory. Then there was a whistling sound, echoing in the dark abyss, and the dark tide surged again. Atsu's body trembled, and it leaned closer to him. Lu Chen hugged its body, and just like yesterday, he bent down to shelter it from the darkness. Atsu quietened down. The darkness roared up. In the darkness of the night, the huge and terrifying black shadow appeared again, violently tearing at the black night and the mountain. When it crossed the mountain peak and roared at the night sky, the earth seemed to tremble because of it. Despite last night's experience, Lu Chen could not help but be shocked by this unusually powerful aura, and subconsciously held his breath. That black shadow was perhaps the king of the night, looking disdainfully in all directions. After roaring, it might have turned around to look for food, but it was also at this moment that the mountains suddenly became silent, and all sounds abruptly returned to silence. The shadow seemed to stop, and suddenly turned around, looking into the distance. Lu Chen seemed to sense something and looked up. At that moment, his heart suddenly beat faster. In the pitch-black night, on the opposite side of the terrifying black shadow, separated by the dark canyon and abyss, another huge shadow slowly appeared on the opposite mountaintop. Lu Chen could not see the outline of the appearance, and could only see the two huge eyes in the darkness, dark green and deep, with an indescribable aura of death. That was a cruel and vicious gaze, as if it wanted to tear everything apart and devour everything. Even when it saw the giant beast of the King of Darkness, it was the same. In his arms, Atsu's body suddenly trembled, and then it raised its head and looked at the shadow above the mountain peak. Chapter 365. Lu Chen felt Atsu's strange movements in his arms and was about to look down to see what was wrong. Who knew that at this moment, in the darkness above them, the two terrifying monsters that were hidden in the darkness suddenly let out a deafening roar at the same time. The voice was like a thunderclap. Even though Lu Chen was quite a distance away, he still felt as if his ears were ringing and buzzing. At the same time, under the huge dark sky above, two huge shadows leaped into the sky. In an instant, all the darkness in the world boiled, and the wind and clouds rolled. With a loud bang, they collided with each other in midair. The towering and majestic great snow mountain seemed to tremble violently at this moment. Deafening roars resounded through the sky. The two terrifying beasts who seemed to belong to the darkness fought fiercely. For a moment, the mountains shook and the earth quaked. For Lu Chen and Atsu, this unusually dangerous canyon, including the bottomless abyss underground, was a place where lives could be taken at any time. But for the two terrifying beasts above, perhaps this was just an inconspicuous crack in their eyes. They didn't care about the crack under their feet at all. Just like that, they fought violently on the top of the mountain. Amidst countless roars and roars, hard rocks of all sizes were easily smashed, torn, and fell. Lu Chen and Atsu felt as though it was raining violently. When immortals fight, mortals suffer. This was probably what it meant. Lu Chen and Atsu, who were originally hiding in the cliff path below, were a little dumbfounded. However, there was nowhere for them to escape. Firstly, the size and strength of these two enormous beasts were too enormous. As soon as they started fighting, it instantly affected a wide area of at least a few hundred meters. Rocks rumbled and fell like rain everywhere, and it was similarly extremely dangerous. Another reason was that the night was too dark, and under the circumstances that one couldn't even see one's own fingers in front of one's face. If one wanted to flee for one's life, then how many boulders would fall? This wasn't much different from giving their lives away. But if they stayed where they were, it seemed that the situation wouldn't be any better. Lu Chen only felt that the mountain behind him and under his feet kept shaking and trembling. At the same time, he could even hear the stiff and cold sound of the mountain cracking. Just from the sound alone, he seemed to be able to imagine the many cracks that suddenly appeared on the cliff behind him. Gradually, along with the violent wind, the rocks of all sizes that began to fall from above also began to fall. All the hair on Atsu's body seemed to stand up at that moment. It stood up with a roar and desperately turned its head to look around, as if it was looking for a place to escape. However, it was surrounded by darkness, and it couldn't see any way out. The dog was so anxious that it stomped its feet. Just as it was about to recklessly rush out of the small stone platform, Lu Chen dragged it back from behind and grabbed it tightly. At the same time, he growled, "If you stay here, you'll die if you go out." After being roared at by him, Atsu temporarily calmed down a little, but Lu Chen could still feel the fear from its slightly trembling body. Lu Chen could still be considered calm, but he was also very nervous. He hugged Atsu tightly, and his mind was spinning anxiously, trying to think of a way to avoid this unexpected disaster, when he heard the sound of a boulder falling. It was the rocks that fell from the sky, smashing fiercely on the opposite stone wall. Countless small rocks shot out in all directions, and then fell along with the rocks. The sound of cracking and rumbling echoed through the canyon, and then more and bigger rocks began to fall. In the darkness, countless black shadows could be seen moving crazily, and no one knew what kind of fate awaited them in the next moment. Lu Chen grabbed Atsu tightly and squeezed into the narrow hole with all his strength. At the same time, he curled up his body. Just as he shrank his feet into the hole, he heard a loud bang, and a big rock fell heavily on the small stone platform, directly smashing half of the small stone platform, and then turned into gravel and fell down. Lu Chen and Atsu were dumbfounded. That was the moment when they were abnormally close to death, but at this time, they didn't even have the time to sigh or feel any lingering fear or hope that they might be lucky. Because more and more falling rocks, accompanied by terrifying roars and sounds of fighting, continued to fall. As the earth shook and the mountains shook, countless large and small rocks turned into black shadows and fell one after another. While they were panicking, Lu Chen suddenly felt the wind above their heads. He and Atsu looked up at the same time, only to see a huge black shadow falling from the sky, and it was smashing towards their heads. There was no way to dodge, no way to dodge, no place to hide, no way to escape. Lu Chen's pupils constricted, and Atsu began to howl madly. In this critical moment, the black shadow continued to smash through the cliffs and boulders, but didn't change course. Instead, it fell faster and faster, as fast as lightning. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off of a piece of flint, Lu Chen finally let out an enraged curse. He held Atsu in his arms and pressed a hand to his chest. Black flames burned fiercely in the darkness of the night, then vanished. In an instant, he and Atsu suddenly disappeared in this narrow space, and a moment later, a huge rock smashed down. With a loud bang, the platform was smashed into pieces, and then it fell down, straight into the bottomless dark abyss. and in the still deep night, on the majestic and vast snowy mountain, under the boundless dark sky, there was still an earth-shattering battle going on. In the darkness, the kings were fighting, and no one knew what it was for. When a white light flashed in front of them, the bodies of Lu Chen and Atsu fell heavily on the ground in the tree hole. One man and one dog lay on the ground, and neither of them got up immediately. It seemed that they still hadn't woken up from the collapse of the world just now. After a while, their breathing seemed to gradually calm down. Lu Chen was still lying on the ground, and Atsu turned around and stood up. It first looked around. This tree hole, which was no longer unfamiliar to it, made it feel a sense of security. It then wagged its tail, walked to Lu Chen's side, lowered its head, and rubbed its head against his body. Lu Chen slowly sat up. Like Atsu, he also turned his head to look at this familiar tree hole, and then he smiled bitterly. "Oh no, Atsu." He reached out his hand and touched Atsu's head. There was a trace of helplessness on his face, and he said, "We are still forced to come here, and we don't know what's going on outside." Atsu turned its head to look at the mountain of food in the tree hole, and barked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen shook his head, and after a moment of silence, he said, "No, we can't wait too long this time, we have to get out of here as soon as possible." As he spoke, Lu Chen stretched out his hand and picked up a simple wooden hourglass from the ground not far away. He had casually made it when he was still in the Black Fire tribe, so that he could keep track of time in this tree hole where he didn't know the flow of time. He stared at the hourglass for a moment, then turned it upside down on the ground, and said to Atsu, "At most 2 or 3 hours, we have to get out of here." Atsu tilted its head, and seemed to be a little puzzled. Lu Chen sighed and said, "In a few hours, it will be almost dawn. I don't know if the two monsters will continue to fight, and I don't know if the situation outside will be dangerous. But I'm afraid that it will be a disaster. This seed is very likely to fall into that crack." Speaking of this, he smiled bitterly again, as if he was also lamenting the helplessness of fate, and then said, "But, no matter what, we still have to get out because tomorrow is the last sunny day." He looked at Atsu and said, "We are trapped in the canyon. No matter what, tomorrow is the last chance, we have to go." Chapter 366. Time was like the sand in the hourglass on the ground, slowly falling bit by bit, silently passing by. When people knew nothing about the future or the outside world, it took a lot of courage to take that step. For a while, Lu Chen sat quietly, staring at the hourglass without saying a word. Atsu did not seem to be in a frenzy, or perhaps it was not fully aware of the danger of going out this time. It just lay on the ground next to Lu Chen, sticking close to him. However, there was a lot of food here, including its favorite dried meat. It could be seen that Atsu was different from usual. It was quiet in the tree hole, as if it had been like this for a long time, and Lu Chen and the others seemed to be just a small splash in the long river of time. Under all the abnormalities, a small anomaly could not make a big splash. Lu Chen raised his head and looked around the tree hole. He was very familiar with this place. From the first time he found this place, he had been here countless times. This mysterious and ancient tree hole had given him a new life. It had supported him through all kinds of pain that he almost fell into hell, and helped him break free from the terrible curse at the last moment. For so many years, this had been his last haven. When he was in the most painful, desperate, and sad times, only this tree hole would be his only shelter, his last place to escape. For so many years, only Atsu could completely share this secret with him. After leaving this place this time, would there be a chance to come back after leaving this place? Lu Chen was not sure, but he was not unfamiliar with this feeling. He was not even afraid. Many years ago, he had experienced many tests of life and death. He just looked at the tree hole and suddenly remembered the legend he had heard before. Then he looked at the empty tree hole and said to himself, "I heard that you have a few companions of the same origin. Yezi? Branches? I don't know when you guys will be together again." The tree hole was silent, as if it had no reaction to his words. However, in the past 10 years, the tree hole had never reacted. Lu Chen naturally wouldn't treat this tree hole as a sentient being. He just casually said that, then closed his eyes and continued to be quiet. Slowly, the sand in the hourglass was about to run out. Time flew by. Atsu squinted his eyes, and Lu Chen leaned against the wall. Everything looked so quiet as if time had stopped. Then, Lu Chen suddenly opened his eyes. Atsu seemed to have sensed something and looked up. Then he saw Lu Chen silently stand up. His face was expressionless as he said in a flat tone, "Atsu, let's go." A white light flashed in the air. Like duckweed in a big river, like a glimmer between heaven and earth, like an ant in the world, so small and humble, quietly appeared in this world. After the light passed, Lu Chen and Atsu suddenly appeared in the air. After a moment of pause, their bodies suddenly fell down. It was really a flash of lightning. The world seemed to be still spinning. There were mountains, rocks, wind, clouds, light, and darkness. There was also a strange boundary where light and shadow intertwined. It was like a turbulent wave, rushing from a certain direction. Lu Chen's pupils suddenly dilated at that moment. He suddenly let out a furious roar. The world was spinning upside down, and everything was screaming crazily in his ears. However, he still stubbornly shook off all these terrifying phantoms. His eyes stared at all the terrifying phantoms for a moment. It was the most silent, most solid, and seemingly the farthest stone. Stone wall. That was the stone wall of the mountain. He was roaring. Then he stretched out his hands with all his might and desperately grabbed the stone wall. There was only a series of ear-piercing crashing sounds. The stone cracked and blood flowed. His body was still sliding down. His hands couldn't grab anything, but he desperately grabbed every crack that had the slightest resistance. After sliding down 7 or 8 times, his right hand suddenly grabbed a stone that was firmly protruding out of the wall about half a foot. Whoo! His body suddenly stopped. His whole body weight was supported by his right hand. At this moment, the chaotic and spinning world finally stopped in his eyes and returned to its original appearance. There was a severe pain from his right hand, as if his flesh was torn apart. However, Lu Chen's reaction to this was only a slight frown. Even his expression didn't change much. He just hung alone in the air and gently took a breath. The whole world seemed to slowly become clear at this moment. The sky was bright. There was light falling from the sky above the canyon. The deep night had indeed passed. The precipice path that he was originally staying on was no longer in front of him. After looking carefully, Lu Chen found that the path did not disappear. Instead, it appeared more than 10 feet above his head. In other words, he had fallen from that precipice path and fell more than 10 feet in one breath. Lu Chen subconsciously looked down. He saw that below his feet, the deep and dark place was like a ferocious mouth, as if waiting to swallow him. Lu Chen shook his head. He stretched out his left hand and felt a gap on the stone wall that he could grab. After sharing the burden of his right hand, he let out a sigh of relief. But at this moment, Lu Chen suddenly heard a burst of barking coming from above. Woof, woof, woof. Woof, 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 woof. Lu Chen's spirit was lifted. He looked up and saw a huge black dog's head poking out from the high precipice path. It looked around as if it was looking for something. It was Atsu. After a while, Atsu saw Lu Chen hanging at the bottom of the cliff. It suddenly became spirited and barked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen also laughed, then he really laughed. He scolded the black dog that was barking happily, then he smiled and said, "Stupid dog, I didn't expect you to be so good." No matter how anxious Atsu was, although Lu Chen seemed to be in a desperate and dangerous situation at the moment, he was still very calm. After his body climbed to the precipice and stood firmly, he began to try to climb up. Since this mountain was originally called a precipice, it was naturally extremely steep and difficult to climb. However, probably after the earth-shattering monster battle last night, the earth shook and the mountain collapsed. Suddenly, there were countless large and small cracks on the precipice and abruptly cracked rocks, making it much easier to climb than before. Just like this, Lu Chen slowly fumbled along the way, looking for a foothold and a place to hold on to. He climbed up bit by bit, and after half an hour, he actually climbed back to the precipice path. When he let out a long breath and sat on the 2 to 3 feet wide precipice path, Atsu next to him ran over with a joyful cry. It used its head to rub against Lu Chen's body, looking very excited. Lu Chen laughed and hugged Atsu's neck. He also patted Atsu's head lightly. "It's not easy, I survived again this time," Lu Chen murmured. Atsu raised its head and looked very happy. Just when it was about to bark at Lu Chen, its eyes suddenly flashed with a green light. It saw the precipice path behind Lu Chen more than 20 feet away. That place was originally also a precipice. Suddenly, another arm stretched out from beneath the rock, and then tightly grabbed onto the edge of the small path. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.